In the deep stillness before dawn, when the sea lies calm and silver beneath the stars, the story of Achilles begins. His name, even in the cradle of time, was whispered like a wave upon the shore, promising greatness and grief. The tale is one of divine blood and human longing, of a boy born between gods and men, and of a fate that could not be escaped. This is the life of Achilles, the son of a goddess and a mortal king, whose light would burn brighter than any before him, and whose fall would echo through eternity. Beneath the vaulted heavens of ancient Greece, in the kingdom of Thea, the sea goddess Thetis rose from her dwelling in the depths. She was of the Nereids, daughters of the old man of the sea, radiant, ageless, terrible in beauty. The gods themselves desired her, but it was foretold that the son born of Thetis would be mightier than his father, destined to surpass all who came before him. When Zeus and Poseidon heard this prophecy, they recoiled from their pursuit, unwilling to plant the seed of their own overthrow. So they turned her fate toward the mortal world, binding her to Peleus, a noble king of Thessaly, known for courage and honour. Their union was both a blessing and a sentence. It was celebrated by all Olympus, yet within it lingered the quiet tremor of destiny. The marriage feast glowed with celestial light, all gods attending save one Eris, the goddess of discord. Angered by her exclusion, she cast upon the table a golden apple inscribed, "To the fairest." From that apple would come rivalry, judgment, and war. But that is another story, one that would entwine forever with Achilles' own. For that apple, and the promise of Helen, would set the stage for Troy. In time, Thetis bore her child a son of light and thunder. She looked upon him and saw both beauty and peril. His eyes, clear and fierce, mirrored the gleam of the Aegean. His cry seemed to shake the air. Yet even as she held him, she heard in her heart the echo of the prophecy that this child would live short but glorious, or long and forgotten. The gods had not spared her from the cruelty of foresight. She resolved to defy fate itself. Some say she took him in secret to the river Styx, that black boundary between life and death. She plunged his body into its cold immortal waters, holding him by the heel. His skin became invulnerable, like tempered bronze. Only the small place her fingers gripped remained untouched, a single mortal flaw. Others say she laid him in the flames of the hearth, night after night, to burn away his weakness, and that Peleus discovered her and stopped her, fearing she would kill their son. Whichever the truth, both tales speak of the same desperation, the love of a mother who would challenge even the gods to protect her child. As Achilles grew, his nature began to reveal itself. He was radiant and swift, with a strength that startled those around him. From his earliest steps, he moved like a flame, alive with restless power. The old women who spun by the fire whispered that he was touched by the divine, and the seers who watched the boy in silence said his path would be paved with blood and glory. Peleus, proud though he was, trembled at what he saw, his son's heart already burning with the hunger of warriors. Knowing the boy's destiny must be shaped with care, Peleus sent him to be taught by Chiron, the wise centaur who lived upon Mount Pelion. There, among the wild slopes and whispering pines, Achilles learned not only the art of battle, but the balance of nature. Chiron taught him the secrets of herbs and healing, of song and harmony. He learned how to draw strength from silence, how to find calm even in the midst of fury. Yet beneath that calmness, the fire always smouldered. Thetis often visited her son upon the mountain. She would rise from the foam, her silver hair glistening with seawater, and she would warn him in a voice like distant thunder. "Your fate is written in the tides," she said. "You may live a long life in obscurity, or a short one in eternal glory." Achilles would listen, his eyes reflecting both the light of the sea and the flame of his will. Even as a child, he did not shrink from the prophecy. There was something in him, a yearning to be remembered, to stand where others had fallen, to carve his name into the edge of history. When storms swept across Pelion, Chiron would find him standing upon the cliffs, arms outstretched to the roaring wind. "You cannot challenge the sky," the centaur would tell him gently, but Achilles would only smile and answer, "Then the sky must learn to yield." It was not arrogance, but an unrelenting spirit, a hunger to meet life head-on. He would wrestle the lions that prowled the hills, and when the creatures bared their teeth, he would laugh. The centaur saw in him both wonder and danger, and he knew that this boy would never live quietly. In those early years, Greece was a land simmering with omens. The gods walked unseen among men. Seers dreamed of fire and fallen towers. Beyond the horizon, the seeds of Troy were already taking root. But for now, Achilles lived in the rhythm of dawn and dusk, his sword gleaming in the morning light, his heart unburdened by the wars yet to come. There was tenderness, too, within him, a side that few would ever see. The songs Chiron taught him, he would sing softly at night, his voice echoing through the trees. The nymphs would pause to listen, and the rivers themselves seemed to slow. He was not yet the man of wrath, nor the slayer of Hector. He was a boy of wonder, shaped by myth and memory, beloved by both gods and mortals. Thetis, watching from the sea, felt both pride and sorrow. She knew that no river could truly wash away mortality. Her son's heart, though hardened by the Styx, still beat with human love and longing. The gods had given him strength but not mercy, glory but not peace. As the years turned, whispers began to reach Pelion, rumours of kings uniting, of prophecies unfolding. A great war was coming, born from beauty and betrayal. The name of Troy drifted upon the winds like a storm gathering over the Aegean. And in that gathering storm, Achilles' fate waited, patient and inevitable. The boy who had once sung to the mountains would soon hear the drums of war. The sea, his mother's realm, would carry him toward a destiny no mortal could escape. And so began the long road from the cradle of Thea to the burning gates of Troy, from the laughter of youth to the silence of legend. The story of Achilles had set sail upon the tide, hidden among kings. The winds of prophecy have a way of finding their course, no matter how the world resists them. As Achilles came of age, the shadow of war stretched ever closer over Greece. The name of Helen, wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta, was carried in every whispered tale. Her beauty, it was said, rivaled that of the goddesses themselves. When Paris of Troy carried her away across the wine-dark sea, the oaths of the Achaean kings were stirred like embers bursting into flame. 1,000 ships were promised, 1,000 hearts sworn to vengeance. Yet even among those oaths, one name shone brightest, the name that had not yet been called: Achilles. Thetis, the sea-born mother who had once tried to make her son immortal, felt the dread of that destiny rising again. She had known the signs long before the mortal world did. She had seen it in dreams of burning towers and waves stained crimson. She understood that her son's glory would come only at the cost of his life. Desperate once more, she sought to hide him not from men, but from fate itself. In secret, Thetis took Achilles from the care of his father and his teacher Chiron. Wrapped in sea-coloured cloth, the boy descended the slopes of Mount Pelion under moonlight. The nymphs wept as she passed, sensing the sorrow that walked beside her. Thetis crossed the lands of Thessaly, then the narrow straits that divided the mortal world from the sacred, until she reached the island of Scyros, ruled by King Lycomedes. There, in a hall of painted marble and perfumed air, she begged sanctuary for her son. Lycomedes, who honoured the gods and owed much to the sea nymphs, agreed to her plea. Achilles was disguised in silken robes, veiled like one of the king's daughters, and placed among the young women of the court. Thetis kissed his brow one last time before she vanished into the foam, her tears mingling with the tide. Thus began a strange and quiet chapter in the life of the greatest warrior Greece would ever know, a chapter hidden in silks and shadows. Among the maidens of Scyros, Achilles was known as Pyrrha, the red-haired girl. The disguise was not perfect. His strength was too great, his stride too sure. Yet youth and secrecy can veil even the brightest flame, and for a time the gods allowed him to rest in peace. Days passed in gentle rhythm. The young women danced in the courtyards, embroidered by lamplight, and sang hymns to Artemis. Achilles, who had been trained in the wild silence of mountains, now lived among laughter and perfume. He moved awkwardly at first, unused to the soft rituals of court life. But the music soothed him, and in that delicate world he found a strange peace. He learned the art of patience, the stillness between the sword strokes, the calm before the storm. Among the maidens was Deidameia, a daughter of the king. She was quiet, kind-eyed, and unafraid to meet the stranger's gaze. Though Achilles' secret was guarded, her heart saw through the veil. Something in his bearing, the strength that could not be hidden, drew her to him. And in the secret hours when the torches dimmed, their hearts met without words. From that union, quiet and tender, a child would be born, Neoptolemus, the blood of gods and men, who would one day carry his father's name into the ruins of Troy. But the calm of Scyros could not last. Across the Aegean, the kings of Greece were gathering, each bound by oath to bring Helen home. They called for seers to name the champions destined for the war. Calchas, priest of Apollo, spoke the truth that silenced them all. Troy would never fall without Achilles, son of Peleus, greatest of the Achaeans. His name was the key to fate, his sword the hinge upon which history would turn. So they sent Odysseus, the cunning king of Ithaca, to find him. Odysseus, whose mind was sharper than any blade, suspected the goddess's trickery. He sailed to Scyros under false pretense, bearing gifts for the maidens of the court, fine fabrics, golden combs, and bright jewels. But among these delicate offerings, he placed one thing that did not belong, a gleaming sword and a polished shield. When the maidens gathered, laughter filled the hall as they admired the ornaments and silks. Yet, as Odysseus had foreseen, one among them did not reach for gold or fabric. Achilles' hand, drawn by instinct, closed around the sword's hilt. In that silent moment, the disguise fell away. The clang of metal echoed like a heartbeat of destiny. Odysseus' eyes met his, and the truth shone clear as sunlight through water. There was no anger, no surprise, only the calm acceptance of a fate long known. Achilles stood revealed, no longer the red-haired maiden, but the warrior he was born to be. Odysseus spoke of duty and honour, of a war that would shape the ages, and of glory that would outlive death itself. He spoke of Troy, of the unbroken walls that awaited their challenge, and Achilles, though still young, felt the old fire rise within him. Thetis had tried to shelter her son from the world, but the call of destiny was stronger than the call of safety. The boy who once sang to the mountains now stood ready to meet the storm. He bid farewell to Deidameia, though his heart lingered with her. She wept, knowing she could not hold him from the path laid before him. The gods had written his story in the stars, and the sea could not wash it away. Before he left, Thetis came once more from the waves. She stood before her son, luminous beneath the moon, her voice trembling with the sorrow of eternity. She gave him armour wrought by divine hands, gleaming with the light of dawn. "Go," she said softly, "but remember the choice that binds you. If you go to Troy, you will win glory beyond all men, but your life will be brief. If you stay, your days will be long and quiet, and your name will fade into the dust." Achilles looked at his mother, his eyes calm and resolute. Thetis saw that she could not turn him. His was a heart that sought meaning over safety, fire over silence. She knew then that she had birthed not merely a warrior, but a legend. When the ships departed Scyros, the sea churned with white foam beneath the oars. Achilles stood at the prow, the wind in his hair, the salt spray against his face. The sun rose behind him, casting his shadow long across the water. The Myrmidons, his loyal warriors, sailed at his side, fierce and silent as wolves. Behind him, the island faded into mist, taking with it the only softness he had ever known. Thetis watched from the deep as the ships grew smaller and smaller, until they were nothing but specks upon the horizon. She knew she would never again see her son as he was now alive, unbroken, untouchable. The sea whispered his name over and over, carrying it ahead of him like a prophecy. Achilles, Achilles, Achilles. In that moment, Greece itself seemed to hold its breath. The oaths of kings, the pride of men, the whims of gods, all converged upon one soul sailing toward his destiny. The drums of war would soon echo across the world, and the boy who once hid among maidens would become the greatest name in the songs of men. But for now, in that fragile dawn before the world began to burn, there was only the steady rhythm of the oars and the endless promise of the sea. The island of Scyros fell silent once more. In its quiet halls, the women spoke softly of the red-haired girl who had vanished into myth, not knowing that the name they whispered would one day outshine every king. The winds carried his story toward Aulis, where the Greek armies gathered beneath banners of every colour. The destiny of Achilles, born of a goddess, hidden among kings, had begun its march toward immortality. The song of his life had found its first great note, rising above the sea's unending sigh. The call of Troy. The dawn that rose over Aulis carried the scent of salt and iron. The horizon glowed with the promise of war, and the harbour stretched endlessly with ships row upon row of dark hulls bobbing upon the sea like restless shadows. It was a sight that Greece had never seen before. 1,000 ships gathered for one cause, drawn from every corner of the Aegean, each bearing kings, warriors, and dreams of undying fame. And among them, newly arrived from Scyros, stood Achilles, the child of prophecy, the storm that fate had been waiting to release. He was still young, not yet 20, yet even in that vast host his presence drew every gaze. His armour caught the morning light like living flame, the gift of his divine mother Thetis, forged by hands unseen. The bronze shimmered as if alive, burnished in sea-green hues that rippled with each breath of wind. At his side were the Myrmidons, his loyal warriors from Thea, dark-eyed and silent, bound to him as body to soul. Together they moved with a unity that made other armies pause, as though the gods themselves walked among them. The beach at Aulis was alive with the noise of preparation. Blacksmiths struck sparks from their anvils, masts creaked, and the cries of gulls mingled with the calls of soldiers chanting the names of their kings. Agamemnon of Mycenae, Menelaus of Sparta, Ajax of Salamis, Odysseus of Ithaca, Nestor of Pylos. Each was mighty in his own right, but all deferred to Agamemnon, chosen to command the host of Greece. Yet even in his authority, he looked upon Achilles with a trace of unease, for he saw not merely a warrior, but a living omen. The seer Calchas stood beside the shore, reading omens in the flight of birds. His voice trembled when he spoke of what was to come. "The wrath of the gods hangs above us," he warned. "Only through sacrifice shall we reach Troy." His eyes flicked toward the horizon where the sea lay still, its winds unmoving. The ships could not sail. The calm was unnatural, sent by Artemis, goddess of the hunt and the moon, whose anger had been stirred. The reason, whispered among the captains, was Agamemnon's pride. He had slain a sacred deer and boasted that he was her equal. Now, the goddess demanded recompense. Days stretched into weeks as the army waited, trapped by the breathless stillness. The sun burned mercilessly, tempers frayed. The men muttered of hunger and fate. Then Calchas spoke again. The wind would not rise until Agamemnon sacrificed his own daughter, Iphigenia. The words struck like thunder through the camp. Achilles heard them too, and his heart recoiled. The notion of blood offered for wind seemed an abomination, but in the age of gods, mortal reason held no sway. Agamemnon hesitated, torn between his ambition and his love, yet the weight of command was a chain around his neck. Deceit became his refuge. He sent for Iphigenia under the guise of a marriage, claiming she was to wed Achilles, the hero of Thea. The girl came, radiant with hope, her mother Clytemnestra at her side. When the truth was revealed and the altar prepared, Achilles was struck with fury. He had never given such consent. To see his name used to lure an innocent to slaughter filled him with a rage that burned like molten metal. He stormed through the camp, denouncing the deceit and demanding her release. But the will of the army and of the gods was stronger than his protest. The ritual proceeded. The priests chanted. The blade was raised. Yet before the final stroke fell, a great wind swept suddenly across the shore. The sea roared, the sails strained against their ropes, and the men fell to their knees. Some say Artemis herself descended and carried the girl away, leaving a deer in her place. Others say she died that day, her blood opening the path to destiny. Whichever truth belongs to the gods, the winds at last began to blow. The fleet was freed to sail. As the ships launched, Achilles stood upon the deck of his vessel, silent and grim. He watched the horizon darken, the waves rise, and the storm clouds gather. The air smelled of lightning and war. Around him, the Myrmidons rode with steady rhythm, their bronze shields gleaming. The fleet stretched behind them like a living creature, a serpent of wood and will slithering toward the east. Above, gulls circled in cries that sounded like lamentation. For 9 days they sailed. The sea, once calm, now heaved with fury, testing their courage. Lightning split the sky, rain lashed their faces, and the thunder rolled like distant drums of battle. Yet Achilles felt no fear. The storm thrilled him, called to the part of his soul that had always longed for struggle. When he stood at the prow, drenched in rain and light, even the waves seemed to bow before him. At last, the mists parted, and the coast of Asia appeared a land of gold sands and high, shining walls. Troy. The name hung in the air like a heartbeat. The soldiers stared in silence as the first rays of dawn struck the city's towers, gilding them in fire. For many, it was the first glimpse of the destiny they had sworn to seek. For others, it was the first sight of the grave they would never leave. The fleet anchored near the shore, and the warriors prepared to land. But before they could set foot upon the sands, a figure emerged from the gates of Troy. Cycnus, son of Poseidon, a defender of the coast, clad in white armour that gleamed like polished marble. His presence was calm yet terrible, as if the sea itself had taken human form. He challenged the Greeks to battle before they could gain ground. Achilles was the first to answer. He leapt from his ship, his armour shining, his spear balanced with effortless grace. The two met upon the beach, and the clash of their blows rang like the forging of the world. Cycnus was invulnerable to steel, his skin shielded by divine parentage. Achilles' strikes glanced harmlessly off him, sparks scattering in the air, but the hero's cunning matched his strength. He realized that if metal could not pierce flesh, force could still break bone. With a roar that silenced the watching armies, Achilles seized Cycnus by the throat, lifted him high, and crushed the breath from him until his divine form turned to sea foam and vanished into the tide. The beach erupted with shouts. The first victory of Troy's long war belonged to Achilles. The omen was set, the gods had chosen their champion. Yet even in triumph, he felt no joy. He looked upon the city rising before him and knew it would take years, perhaps a lifetime, to bring those walls down. And within those walls lived men who loved, who feared, who prayed, men who, like him, were drawn into a storm beyond their choosing. That night, as fires burned along the shore, Achilles sat apart from the others. The Myrmidons sang softly of their homeland, of fields of Thessaly and the sea winds of Thea. But Achilles was silent, his eyes fixed upon the horizon where Troy's lights shimmered. In that golden glow, he saw not victory, but the long shadow of his own fate. Thetis had told him once that his life would blaze like a meteor, brilliant, brief, and unstoppable. As the embers drifted skyward, he felt that truth stir within him. He knew he would not die in obscurity. He would die with his name on the lips of generations, his deeds immortalized in song. Yet beneath that promise lay the quiet ache of something deeper, the yearning for the life he had never lived, the peace he had never known. When dawn came again, the Greeks began their siege in earnest. Achilles led his men through the first battles, swift and unrelenting. Village after village fell beneath his assault. His fame spread like wildfire. His name became a prayer to the Greeks and a curse to the Trojans. But still, Troy's great walls held. They loomed above the plains, unbroken and proud, a city protected by both skill and divinity. The years would grind on, victories would turn to grudges, and the fire in Achilles' heart would grow darker. But here, at the beginning on the shores of Aulis, under the salt wind of prophecy, the path had been chosen. The boy who once sang to the mountains was now the spear of Greece. The gods had placed him in motion, and the world would tremble in his wake. The sails of the fleet unfurled, and the morning sun rose behind them like a blood-red coin upon the sea. The war of 1,000 hearts had begun, and at its blazing centre stood Achilles, unconquered, untested, unstoppable. The journey to Aulis. The winds that once carried the ships toward Troy soon turned restless, shifting like the breath of the gods. The fleet had scattered and reformed across the Aegean, driven by storms that no mortal compass could master. Yet in that chaos, one truth endured. Greece was now bound by fate to the path of war. Every oar stroke, every gust of wind brought Achilles closer to the destiny his mother had tried to hide him from. The drums of Aulis had not merely summoned men to battle, they had awakened the will of the heavens. As dawn unfolded across the horizon, the sea shimmered like molten bronze. Achilles stood upon the deck of his ship, his eyes fixed on the endless expanse before him. Around him, the Myrmidons rode in perfect rhythm, their bodies moving as one strong, tireless, unbroken. They were the warriors of Thea, men born of loyalty and shaped by storm. Each bore upon his shield the emblem of the seahorse, sign of their divine kinship through Thetis. The waves that once carried them to fish and trade now carried them toward blood and legend. The fleet reached Aulis once more, that fateful harbour where the sacrifice of Iphigenia had stirred the gods to mercy. There, the armies of Greece were gathering again, kings from every realm of the mainland and isles, banners of every colour fluttering in the salt wind. The beach was a living ocean of men and bronze. The clang of forges, the shout of captains, the bellow of oxen being sacrificed to Poseidon, these became the heartbeat of destiny. Agamemnon, lord of Mycenae, stood at the centre of it all, tall, broad, eyes gleaming with both pride and the burden of command. He was a king, accustomed to obedience, not to equals. Yet when Achilles approached, the murmurs of the soldiers changed. The son of Thetis moved through the crowd like a flame through dry grass. The men who had heard his name in prophecy now saw him in the flesh, young, radiant, his armour alive with the glint of morning. Even the older kings, men hardened by age and conquest, felt a tremor of unease. They knew, in some unspoken corner of their hearts, that the gods had sent not merely a warrior, but a reckoning. The two greeted one another with outward courtesy. Agamemnon spoke of unity and divine mission, of oaths and honour. Achilles listened, his expression calm, his silence as commanding as another man's roar. He had come not to serve kings, but to serve glory. Yet even then, a seed of discord was sown between them, the seed of pride. It lay dormant for now, waiting to bloom in the fires of Troy. Before they could sail, the priests called for rites to appease the gods. The sea, though calmer than before, was still capricious. Smoke rose from the altars, as bulls and rams were offered to Poseidon, Apollo, and Zeus. The scent of burning flesh mixed with salt and pine, and the air grew thick with chanting. Achilles watched, his mind half in reverence, half in restlessness. He had always been taught that the gods shaped fate, but in the depths of his heart he already sensed that he himself was becoming an instrument of their will. When the final omens were read, the sails were raised. The sound of 1,000 oars dipping into the sea echoed across the horizon, a sound like thunder rolling from one end of Greece to the other. The fleet moved as a single creature, vast, unstoppable, gliding toward immortality. On the journey, the warriors spoke of omens and glory. Songs were sung of Helen, the face that had summoned them all. Poets imagined her beauty as the light of dawn, her loss as the night that had befallen Greece. Yet to Achilles, the war was never about Helen. It was about the promise of greatness, the pursuit of a life that burned so bright it left no shadow. He had no illusions of peace. He had only the certainty of purpose. Each night, when the fleet anchored in hidden coves, the men built fires along the shore. They feasted, told tales of home, and polished their weapons until the stars reflected upon the blades. Achilles sat apart, the glow of the flames flickering across his armour. He was not lonely, his solitude was the stillness before the storm. When the others slept, he would rise and walk to the water's edge. There he would listen to the waves and feel the pulse of his mother's realm beneath the surface. Sometimes he thought he could hear her voice in the foam, soft, sorrowful, calling him back, but he never answered. The gods watched from afar. On Olympus they gathered to speak of the coming war. Zeus, seated upon his throne of thunder, looked down upon the mortal ships like a fisherman watching his nets. Hera's eyes burned with vengeance against Troy, while Athena's calm calculation turned the tide of fate in secret. Even Aphrodite smiled faintly, for it was her golden promise to Paris that had birthed this storm. Yet among them all, only Thetis wept. Her tears fell upon the sea, turning its foam pale as milk. She knew that her son's name would live forever, but she also knew that eternity had a price. By the 7th night, the fleet reached the shores of Tenedos, an island not far from Troy. There, they anchored and gathered their strength. The air was heavy with tension, the calm before the clash of worlds. Achilles and his closest companion, Patroclus, stood side by side upon the rocks, gazing toward the distant glow of Troy's towers. The city shimmered in the haze like a mirage golden, serene, untouchable. Achilles felt the pull of it deep within his chest. He did not speak, but Patroclus knew his thoughts as if they were his own. The Greeks held council that night beneath a canopy of stars. Agamemnon spoke of strategy, of sieges and supplies. Odysseus, ever cunning, warned of patience and deception. Nestor, the oldest among them, spoke of honour and the balance between rage and reason. But when Achilles rose to speak, the murmurs fell away. His voice, though calm, carried through the camp like the wind before a tempest. "We did not come across the sea to waste away beneath the walls," he said. "The gods have called us here for glory, and glory waits for no man." There was power in his words, the conviction of one who already walked beside fate. Even those who envied him could not deny his command. The men roared their approval, and in that sound the war was given breath. When dawn broke, the ships advanced again, their sails swelling like the chests of beasts ready to strike. The first sight of Troy was like a dream. Its walls gleamed under the sun, vast and perfect, as if built by the hands of gods. Towers rose like spears of marble, and beyond them, smoke from the hearths of thousands curled gently into the sky. It was beautiful, and in that beauty lay tragedy. The Greeks landed upon the plain of Scamander. The sand turned to mud beneath the trample of warriors. Spears glittered, armour flashed, and the air rang with shouts. Before the city gates, the first blood of the war was spilled. The Trojans fought fiercely, their archers darkening the sky, but the Greeks pressed forward like a tide that could not be turned. Achilles led the charge, his spear finding its mark in warrior after warrior. His movements were fluid, almost divine, a blur of bronze and sunfire. The Myrmidons followed close, their discipline unbroken, their formation a wall of death. By midday, the beach belonged to Greece. the first ships were hauled ashore, and the camps were raised. The banners of Mycenae, Sparta, and Phthia fluttered in the sea wind, each marking a claim upon destiny. The bodies of the fallen lay between them, offerings to both gods and time. Achilles stood above it all, his chest heaving, his skin slick with the sweat of battle. He looked toward Troy's distant gates, where the defenders watched in silence. For a moment, the two worlds, Greek and Trojan, seemed to study one another across the plain, each recognizing in the other a mirror of fate. As night fell, the fires burned bright. Songs rose again, but they were different now, songs of blood, of courage, of the day's triumphs. Achilles sat by the shore, cleaning his blade, the reflection of the flames dancing in his eyes. He knew this was only the beginning. The true war, the one written in prophecy and dream, had yet to begin. Behind him, the sea whispered against the sand, carrying the faint echo of a mother's voice and the sorrow of gods. Before him lay the plain of Troy, vast and waiting, ready to swallow the years of men, and Achilles, son of Thetis and Peleus, stood between them, half mortal, half divine, wholly consumed by the destiny he had chosen. The journey to Aulis was over. The journey to immortality had begun. The hero of Phthia, before he was the terror of Troy, before his name echoed across centuries, Achilles had been a boy of Phthia, a land of green meadows and salt winds, where mountains leaned close to the sea. It was there that his mortal father, Peleus, ruled with steady hands and an honourable heart. And it was there that the seeds of his greatness were planted, long before the war horns of Aulis ever called. Phthia was a quiet kingdom, cradled between the Thessalian hills and the shimmering gulf. Its people lived by the rhythms of the earth, ploughing, fishing, singing hymns to the river gods. In the early mornings, the mist would rise like breath from the sea, and the air would carry the cries of gulls mingled with the laughter of boys sparring in the training fields. Among those boys was one whose spirit could not be contained, a child whose feet seemed to fly over the grass, and whose voice could rouse courage even in the weary. That boy was Achilles. Peleus loved his son fiercely, though he often saw in him the fire of Thetis, restless, untamable, divine. He tried to raise him among mortals, to teach him restraint and reason, but Achilles was not made for restraint. When the other boys tired from training, he continued. When storms swept through the coast, he ran into the rain, shouting challenges at the thunder. He fears nothing, the elders said, not man, not beast, not the gods themselves. Yet even Peleus knew he could not shape his son alone, and so he sought out the one being who could guide both mortal and divine Chiron, the wise centaur of Mount Pelion. Chiron, who had taught generations of heroes, Jason, Theseus, Heracles, was unlike the other wild centaurs who roamed the hills. His nature was noble, his spirit bound to knowledge and virtue. In his cave among the pines, music, medicine, and wisdom thrived together. When Peleus brought the young Achilles to him, Chiron regarded the boy in silence. "This one burns too brightly," he said at last. "The flame that gives light can also consume." But he took Achilles in, and under his tutelage the boy began to grow into the legend that the world would one day remember. The days upon Pelion were long and golden. Chiron taught Achilles the art of war, the bow, the spear, the sword, but he also taught him the art of peace. He showed him how to listen to the forest, how to read the wind's voice among the trees. He taught him the healing herbs that grew along the mountain streams, how to mend wounds as well as inflict them. Achilles learned to play the lyre, his fingers quick and sure upon the strings. The music he made was unlike anything the mountain had heard, strong yet sorrowful, like sunlight trembling upon water. He hunted beside Chiron through the high valleys, learning to move with silence and precision. He learned the discipline of patience, the weight of mercy. To conquer others, Chiron said, is strength, but to conquer yourself, that is greatness. The boy listened, though his heart still longed for challenge, for motion, for destiny. He was a creature of both harmony and storm, a soul too large to be bound to one path. When Achilles reached manhood, his fame had already spread through the kingdoms of Greece. Messengers spoke of a youth who could outrun the wind, who could fell lions with his bare hands. Poets sang of his golden hair streaming like fire, of his laughter echoing across the hills. Kings whispered his name, and even the gods took note. Thetis, still bound to the sorrow of foresight, visited her son in secret, rising from the sea at dusk. She would find him at the mountain's edge, his spear in hand, the sky aflame with sunset. "My child," she would say, "the years move swiftly. The world beyond these hills is calling." Achilles would bow his head, though the wind in his chest longed to answer. "Mother," he said once, "if the world calls, then it is not in my nature to refuse." Thetis wept, for she knew the truth in his words. She had dipped him once in the river of death to shield him from harm, yet no water could wash away destiny. The heel she held had remained mortal, but so too had his heart. It beat with the pulse of men with love, pride, and the hunger for remembrance. She left him gifts from the sea, a gleaming spear tipped with divine metal, armor light as air, a shield that shimmered like the horizon. Each gift carried a warning unspoken. By the time the first whispers of war reached the mountain, Achilles had become the very embodiment of heroism. But within that strength lived contradiction. He was compassionate as he was fierce. He could heal as he could destroy. Chiron saw this duality and feared for the balance. "Remember, Achilles," he told him, "a hero is not measured by victory alone, but by what he protects." Achilles nodded, but his eyes drifted toward the east. His heart already belonged to the sound of distant drums. When news came that the kings of Greece were gathering, that Helen had been taken, and that 1,000 ships would sail for vengeance, something in Achilles stirred that no wisdom could quiet. The name of Troy reached him like a chord struck deep in his soul. It was not greed nor hatred that moved him, it was the call of immortality, the chance to write his name upon the fabric of the world. The morning he left Pelion, the forest was hushed. Chiron stood at the edge of the clearing, his eyes filled with pride and sorrow. "You go to where legends are made," the centaur said softly. "But remember, even legends cast shadows." Achilles embraced him, his heart heavy but resolute. He looked once more upon the mountains, the rivers, the stars that had watched him grow. He carried their silence with him like armor. When he returned to Phthia, his father Peleus met him with both pride and dread. "My son," he said, "you have become more than mortal men, but the world beyond this land is cruel and faithless. Trust not only in your strength, but in your heart." Achilles bowed deeply. "I will bring honor to your name," he answered, though he knew that his honor would come drenched in blood. Before he departed for Aulis, the people of Phthia gathered to see him off. Old men clasped his hands. Mothers brought flowers. Children whispered his name as if it were a prayer. The sea wind lifted his cloak, and the sunlight burned upon his armor like fire. He stood upon the prow of his ship, the spear of Peleus in his grasp, and turned his gaze toward the horizon. The waves rose to meet him like the breath of the gods. As the ship drifted from the shore, a strange stillness fell over the crowd. Some said the sky brightened, that the sea itself shimmered with a divine glow. Others said they heard faint music upon the wind, the echo of a lyre, the song of destiny itself. Thetis watched from the deep as her son sailed away. Around her, the sea darkened with her grief. She knew that this journey would not end in Phthia, nor in any mortal port. It would end upon the burning plain before Troy, beneath the watchful eyes of Olympus. The boy of Phthia was gone. In his place rose the hero. The world had waited for the one who would shape history, and in doing so, break it. The siege begins. The first light of dawn spilled across the Aegean, gilding the sea in sheets of gold as the Greek ships cut through the morning mist. After weeks of travel, storms, and scattered landings, the fleet at last approached the coast of Troy. From afar, the city rose like a dream of marble and bronze, its high walls glimmering in the sun, its towers catching the wind like watchful sentinels. Behind those walls, the wealth of Asia gleamed, and the pride of kings waited. The Greeks gathered upon the shore, their encampments stretching for miles, a sea of tents, banners, and bronze. Fires burned along the beaches at night, turning the coastline into a ring of stars. The scent of smoke and salt filled the air, mingled with the restless murmurs of 1,000 men. They had come to reclaim Helen, the queen whose beauty had set the world aflame. But in truth, they had come for glory and for conquest. And at the heart of them all stood Achilles, the shining son of Phthia, the storm the gods had loosed upon the world. When the first war council was called, Agamemnon sat upon a high dais, surrounded by his captains Menelaus, Odysseus, Nestor, Ajax the Great, Ajax the Lesser, Diomedes, and others whose names would soon echo through time. The air was thick with pride and rivalry. Agamemnon spoke with the authority of command, but his words were heavy with ambition. He reminded them that he was the High King of Greece, chosen to lead, and that no man, however noble or fierce, would stand above him. Achilles, standing at the edge of the gathering, said nothing. His silence was not submission, it was the stillness before the breaking storm. Odysseus, wise in the way of men, saw the sparks between the two and knew that pride would one day turn ally against ally. But for now, the war demanded unity, and all kings swore their oaths once more before the gods. When the time came, the armies formed their ranks along the shore. The Trojans had marched out from their gates to meet them, their bronze armour flashing in the sunlight like a living wall. From the ramparts, trumpets blared. From the sea, the drums of Greece answered. The plain of Scamander would be their battleground, a vast field of dust and reeds, bordered by the river that flowed like a serpent between the armies of east and west. Achilles led the Myrmidons into position, their black armour gleaming beneath the morning sun. Each carried a long ash spear and a round shield painted with the crest of the seahorse. They stood silent, fearless, disciplined, a mirror of their commander. At their head, Achilles' eyes burned with fierce light. The wind from the sea tugged at his cloak. His golden hair shone like flame. He looked upon the Trojans as if they were not men but destiny itself. The clash began with the sound of horns, a sound that seemed to tear the sky in two. Arrows darkened the air, spears shattered, shields clanged like thunder. The dust rose, and in that storm of chaos, Achilles moved like a god of war. His spear struck true again and again, his shield flashing with blinding force. Every step he took left a mark in the earth. Every cry that rose before him was silenced by bronze. He met Cycnus, the son of Poseidon, upon the field, a man whose skin no weapon could pierce. The two circled one another amid the carnage, the air alive with the noise of battle. Achilles' spear glanced off Cycnus' chest like rain upon stone, but the hero's cunning was as sharp as his blade. Fighting once, twice, he struck with the butt of his spear, crushing Cycnus' throat beneath divine strength. The warrior fell lifeless, and his divine form dissolved into sea foam that hissed and vanished into the dust. The Greeks roared in triumph. The name of Achilles rose from 1,000 throats, carried upon the wind toward the walls of Troy. Inside the city, fear rippled through its defenders. Priam, the aged king, watched from his tower, his heart heavy. His sons Hector, Paris, Deiphobus stood beside him, their faces set in grim resolve. "The gods have sent us a storm," the old king murmured, "and it wears the face of a man." The days turned to weeks, and the war spread like fire across the plains. The Greeks raided the Trojan countryside, burning villages, capturing herds, enslaving the people. Each new conquest brought spoils, gold, cattle, women to the Greek camp, and in each raid, Achilles led the charge, swift as a falcon, his myrmidons striking and vanishing like waves upon the shore. His fame grew with every victory, and so too did his pride. The men began to call him not just a warrior, but the greatest of all who lived. Among the captives taken from one such raid was Briseis, a young woman of royal blood, her beauty quiet and sorrowful. She was given to Achilles as a prize of honour, a symbol of his valour. He treated her not as a slave, but with gentleness uncommon among conquerors. In her silence, he found a strange calm, something that soothed the fires that burned within him. For a time, amidst the chaos of war, there was peace between them, fragile as a whisper. But even as his fame rose, so too did the envy of others. Agamemnon watched Achilles with narrowing eyes, seeing in him both a weapon and a threat. The other kings whispered of his arrogance, his divine blood, his unwillingness to bow to mortal authority. And though the Greeks fought as one army, already the fault lines of pride began to form. The gods, too, watched with interest. On Olympus, Hera urged the Greeks forward, her hatred for Troy boundless. Athena guided their spears, her wisdom cold and sharp. But Apollo, protector of Troy, looked upon Achilles with both admiration and resentment. "He burns too brightly," the god said. "Such fire must one day consume itself." And far below the waves, Thetis wept, knowing that every victory her son won was a step closer to the end she could not prevent. As the siege dragged on, the Greeks built walls of their own along the shore, fortifying their camp against Trojan raids. Behind those walls, the heroes rested and waited, their tempers shortening as the seasons turned. For 9 long years, the war endured its battles fierce, its outcome uncertain. The plains of Troy became a graveyard of names, the river Scamander choked with the dead. Through it all, Achilles remained unbroken. He moved through battle like a spirit, untouched by fear, unmatched by any foe. The Trojans came to dread the sight of his armour, the sound of his chariot wheels, the cry of the myrmidons behind him. Songs spread among the Greeks that he was born of fire and foam, that his mother had dipped him in death itself, and the Trojans whispered that he could not die, that even the gods feared him. But glory, like the tide, can never stay still. It must rise, and it must fall. Already, the currents of fate were shifting. The same pride that had driven Achilles to greatness would soon draw him into conflict with the very men he fought beside. And in that conflict, the gods would find their game renewed. For now, the siege held. The Greeks had come to Troy and would not leave until the city fell, or they themselves were dust. The walls of Troy stood high and proud, unbroken and gleaming. Yet beyond them, the people trembled. And upon the shore, beneath banners tattered by sea winds and smoke, Achilles stood watching those same walls, the fire in his heart unquenched. He did not yet know that within those walls was the man who would end his story, the warrior destined to meet him in the dust, beneath the gaze of gods and mortals alike. He did not yet know the name Hector as anything more than a rumour. But the time would come soon enough, and when it did, the plains of Troy would burn brighter than the sun. The siege had begun. The song of Achilles had entered its fiercest verse, and in the calm before the storm, the gods smiled, for they knew the world would never again see its equal. The rage of the Greeks. The 10th year of the war dawned with a sky the colour of blood and smoke. The plains of Troy lay scarred, the river choked with armour and ash, and still the walls held firm. For nearly a decade, the Greeks had camped upon that same desolate shore, their tents faded by sun and salt, their tempers hardened by years of stalemate. What had begun in glory was turning to bitterness. The songs of victory had become muttered curses. The laughter of the campfires had been replaced by the hiss of resentment. The war had devoured everything: youth, hope, mercy. And in that crucible of exhaustion and rage, pride began to turn inward. Achilles, still unmatched in battle, had become the living emblem of Greek strength. When he strode across the plain, Men followed. When he fought, the Myrmidons carved through the enemy like fire through dry grass. His name was invoked as both blessing and warning. Yet his greatness cast a long shadow, and within that shadow, Agamemnon's envy grew like a poison vine. The high king of Mycenae, bound by title to lead but not by grace to inspire, had watched Achilles' glory eclipse his own. He saw the men's eyes light for the son of Thetis, not for their appointed commander. He saw the spoils of war drift toward Achilles' tents, the praise of poets echo his name. And though Agamemnon ruled by authority, Achilles ruled by awe, and that, to a proud man, was the deepest wound. The gods themselves seemed to mirror the quarrel. Hera and Athena favoured the Greeks, but their eyes turned more often to Achilles, admiring the purity of his valour. Apollo and Aphrodite, who watched from the walls of Troy, whispered of pride and ruin. Zeus, seated upon Olympus, merely smiled at the design of it all. He had given mortals free will, not out of mercy but curiosity, to see what they would destroy in their pursuit of immortality. It was in the heat of this growing tension that the moment of fracture came. The Greeks had taken the nearby city of Lyrnessus, its treasures and captives divided among the warriors. As was custom, each king claimed his share. Achilles, whose Myrmidons had led the assault, received Briseis, a woman of rare beauty and quiet strength. Agamemnon claimed Chryseis, daughter of a priest of Apollo. But the gods watch closely when men take what is sacred. Chryseis' father came to the Greek camp bearing ransom gold enough to fill a chest and begged for her release. His plea was simple, his reverence sincere. Yet Agamemnon spurned him, mocking both the priest and the god he served. "Go back," he said, "and do not anger me again. Your daughter stays with me." The old man left in silence, but his prayers rose like smoke to the heavens, and Apollo, hearing the insult to his priest, took up his silver bow. For 9 days his arrows fell upon the Greek camp, not arrows of wood and bronze, but of plague and fever. The cattle died, the dogs withered, and soon the men themselves began to fall, their bodies burning with unseen fire. The cries of the dying filled the air, and the once proud army turned to panic. At last, Achilles called for counsel. "We must find the cause," he said, "or the war will end not with Troy's fall, but our own." Calchas the seer, trembling beneath the eyes of kings, revealed the truth. The god Apollo is angered by Agamemnon's refusal. He demands the girl returned. The camp fell silent. Agamemnon's face darkened with fury. "And who dares command me?" he thundered. "Shall a god dictate terms to a king? Or perhaps one of you wishes to strip me of my prize?" His eyes, like coals, turned toward Achilles. "You, son of Thetis, you speak boldly for one who is not yet king." Achilles rose, calm but unyielding. "No one questions your crown," he said, his voice steady as iron. "But no crown can defy a god. Return the girl and spare your army." Agamemnon's pride flared hotter. "And if I must give her back," he sneered, "then I will take another in her place, perhaps yours." A murmur rippled through the assembly. Achilles' hands tightened at his sides. "You would dare?" he asked, his voice low. "After I have fought your wars, filled your ships with spoils, made your name great." Agamemnon stepped forward, his words sharp as a drawn blade. "You are nothing without me. I am your lord, and you are my soldier." Something ancient and dangerous stirred within Achilles. His eyes burned, his breath slowed. For a moment, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. His hand went to the hilt of his sword, then stopped. Athena stood beside him, unseen by all but him, her hand upon his shoulder. "Do not strike," she whispered. "You will win no glory in killing your own." Her eyes, grey and calm, pierced through his rage. Achilles exhaled, the tension leaving his body like a sigh through stone. He turned from the High King, but his words fell heavy as thunder. "I will not fight for you again," he said. Not one blow, not one step. You have dishonored me before all Greece. May your pride win you the war, if it can." The council broke apart in uneasy silence. That night, under a sky stripped of stars, Agamemnon sent his heralds to Achilles' tent. They came not with peace, but to seize Briseis. She went without struggle, though tears shimmered in her eyes. Achilles watched her go, his heart hollow, his honour bleeding. When the heralds had gone, he stood at the edge of the sea and called to his mother. Thetis rose from the waves, pale and radiant, her sorrow reflected in the moonlight. "What do you ask of me, my son?" "Justice," Achilles answered. "Ask Zeus to turn the tide against the Greeks. Let them see what they are without me." The goddess listened, her heart torn. She knew this path would only deepen his doom, but she could not deny him. She ascended to Olympus and knelt before the Father of gods. "Grant the Trojans strength," she pleaded, "until the Greeks remember the worth of Achilles." Zeus looked down upon her, his eyes unreadable. "So be it," he said, "but you will not like the cost." The next day, the war turned. Without Achilles and his Myrmidons, the Greeks faltered. The Trojans, led by Hector, noble prince, and heir to Priam, surged forward like a storm reborn. Their chariots swept across the plain, their spears flashed, their courage ignited. The Greeks who had once mocked the wrath of Achilles now fled before Hector's might. Agamemnon watched his army crumble and knew the truth of what he had done. Achilles, from his tent, heard the cries of the dying and felt no triumph, only silence. He had withdrawn from the fight, but his spirit still burned. Pride warred with pity within him, and he could find peace in neither. Thetis's words echoed in his mind. The flame that burns brightest consumes the fastest. And so the Greeks, once united, became divided. Their rage had turned inward, their strength undone by pride. The gods looked down and smiled, for they knew what men could not, that no war is ever won by swords alone. It is won and lost within the heart. And in Achilles' heart, a storm had begun that no mortal army could withstand. The wrath withdrawn, the camp of the Greeks had fallen into gloom. The drums of war were silent, the wind carried no songs, and the sea itself seemed to draw back in sorrow. Achilles had withdrawn from the battlefield, and with his absence, the heart of the army had gone hollow. The tents of the Myrmidons stood apart from the rest, silent, disciplined, their black banners hanging motionless in the salt air. The men obeyed their commander's will. If Achilles would not fight, neither would they. The sun rose and fell, marking the days of suffering. Without Achilles, the Greeks were forced to face the Trojans alone. Hector, son of Priam, strode through the dust with the calm fury of one born to defend his city. Under his leadership, the Trojans became a flood against which the Greek line broke again and again. They drove the enemy back to the ships, setting fire to the outer walls of their camp. The smoke rose like a funeral pyre for the pride of Greece. In his tent by the sea, Achilles sat in stillness. His armour lay untouched beside him, gleaming faintly in the dim light. The hum of the waves was the only sound, steady as a heartbeat. Sometimes he would take up his lyre, strumming slow, mournful notes, the same music Chiron had once taught him among the quiet pines of Mount Pelion. The melody drifted through the night, soft but unyielding, a song of both beauty and defiance. It was the voice of a hero who refused to move, a man at war with his own purpose. Patroclus often sat beside him, silent companion through the long hours. He loved Achilles not only for his greatness, but for the rare gentleness that lived beneath his pride. "You cannot watch forever," Patroclus said once, though the words were spoken like a prayer rather than a plea. Achilles did not answer. His gaze remained fixed on the sea, where the light broke into endless shifting shards. "The gods have turned their faces from the Greeks," said another Myrmidon one night. But Achilles replied softly, "No, it is I who have turned mine." The men feared to speak of what was coming, but they felt it in their bones. Each dawn brought fresh cries from the battlefield, names of friends, brothers, kings cut down beneath Troy's walls. Each dusk brought silence, the kind that only follows ruin. And still Achilles waited. Far above, on Olympus, the gods watched the balance of war tilt and sway. Zeus had honoured Thetis' request. He gave strength to Troy and glory to Hector. Each victory of the Trojans, each defeat of the Greeks, was another link in the chain that bound Achilles to his destiny. Hera fumed, Athena brooded, and Apollo's laughter echoed like sunlight glinting on steel. Among mortals, despair deepened. The Greek kings gathered in council again, weary and desperate. Agamemnon, his pride now broken by loss, rose before them. His eyes were red, his face haggard. "We have wronged Achilles," he said at last. "Without him, our cause is lost." Odysseus, ever the voice of cunning reason, stepped forward. "Then make amends," he urged. "Send gifts, gold, and words that heal what pride has torn apart." And so they sent an embassy to Achilles, Odysseus, Ajax, and Phoenix, his old mentor from Thea. They came at night, when the sea was calm and the stars reflected like cold fire upon the water. They found Achilles sitting by the shore, his lyre resting upon his knee, his face lit by the pale shimmer of the moon. Odysseus spoke first, careful and measured. He spoke of honour, of comradeship, of the glory that awaited should Achilles return. He offered rich gifts from Agamemnon gold, tripods, chariots, horses, and even the return of Briseis untouched. He promised fame eternal, the gratitude of Greece, the immortality of song. Phoenix followed, his voice older, warmer, filled with memory. He spoke of Peleus, of the father who waited in sorrow for news of his son. "He hoped," Phoenix said, "that you would be both great and gentle, that your name would shine in the world, but your heart remained kind." Last, Ajax, blunt and loyal, spoke few words. "We are dying out there," he said simply. "Without you, Greece falls. If you care nothing for the kings, fight for your friends." Achilles listened to them all. When they finished, he set aside his lyre and rose slowly to his feet. His eyes gleamed with the deep fire of a soul divided. "You speak well," he said, "but your words fall upon stone. I have been dishonoured. A king who shames the best of his warriors is no king to me. Let him fight his own battles. I will sail home. My heart is tired of this empty war." Odysseus tried again, but Achilles raised a hand. "No more. Tell Agamemnon he has taught me this. There is no glory worth the cost of a man's peace. I will not die for another's pride." The envoys left in silence. Their mission failed. As they walked back to camp, Phoenix turned once more, his old eyes glistening with grief. Achilles stood alone, framed against the dark sea, a figure carved in sorrow and flame. When they were gone, he returned to his tent. There he found Briseis' shawl folded upon the bed, a fragment of the life he had lost. He held it for a long time, the faint scent of her hair still clinging to the fabric. For the first time in many years, he felt the weight of loneliness real and human. It was a feeling no armour could defend against. Days passed. The Trojans pushed harder. Hector's chariot thundered across the plain, scattering the Greeks before him. The ships were driven back toward the water, their sails slashed, their masts broken. The sea turned black with ash. The cries of the dying mingled with the hiss of burning wood. Patroclus could bear it no longer. He came to Achilles' tent, his voice shaking not with fear, but with love. "If you will not fight," he said, "then let me go in your stead. Lend me your armour, that the Myrmidons may follow me. Let the Trojans think Achilles has returned. Their fear will turn the tide." Achilles studied him for a long moment. In the silence between them lay years of friendship, battles fought side by side, laughter shared under starlight. At last, he nodded. "Go then," he said, but do not pursue them to the walls. Drive them back, save the ships, and return to me. Do not seek glory, Patroclus. Leave that burden to me." Patroclus bowed, his heart heavy with both duty and foreboding. As he left the tent, Achilles looked out once more toward the sea. The waves lapped softly against the sand, whispering secrets only the gods could understand. Above him, the stars burned cold and eternal. Below them, the greatest of all warriors sat in exile from his own purpose, trapped not by chains of iron, but by pride and grief. The wrath of Achilles had withdrawn from battle, but not from fate. It waited silent, patient, inevitable, as the world turned toward tragedy. The fall of Patroclus. The morning broke with a stillness that seemed almost merciful. The plains of Troy glowed in a haze of rising heat, the air thick with dust and the scent of smoke. The Greek ships, battered and scorched, lay pressed against the shore like wounded beasts. From the walls of Troy, the sound of trumpets rose a challenge, bright and terrible. The Trojans were ready to finish what they had begun, and in the Greek camp, among the silent ranks of the Myrmidons, Patroclus prepared to wear another man's destiny. Achilles stood beside him, his expression unreadable. Before them, the armour gleamed the divine bronze, forged by Hephaestus himself, gifted once by Thetis to her son. It shimmered like the surface of the sea, each plate carved with stories of gods and men. Patroclus reached for it, his hands trembling. The armour was heavy, almost alive, as though it recognized the unworthy touch of another. Achilles watched in silence as his friend fastened the greaves, drew the cuirass over his chest, and took up the great plumed helmet that bore his likeness. When Patroclus turned to face him, Achilles saw his own reflection in those bronze curves, the echo of himself, but gentler, more mortal. It was as if the world were about to lose something pure and not yet know it. "Go," Achilles said at last, his voice quiet as the sea before a storm. "Drive them from the ships. Show them the face they fear. But when they run, stop. Do not chase them to the walls. Leave the glory for me." Patroclus nodded, though in his heart he knew that glory, once awakened, does not stop for the will of men. He grasped Achilles' arm in farewell. Neither spoke again. Some things lie too deep for words. When he left the tent, the Myrmidons rose as one. They had waited long in the shadow of their master's anger, and now, at the sight of that shining armour, their hearts ignited. They did not know it was not Achilles who led them. They saw only the gleam of destiny, the symbol of vengeance. With a cry that shook the air, they stormed toward the battle. The Trojans, seeing that terrible figure blaze upon the field, faltered. "Achilles!" they shouted in terror. "The Greek lion has returned!" Panic spread like fire through dry grass. Their lines wavered, broke, and began to flee. Patroclus struck with a fury that was not his own, his borrowed spear flashing in the sun. The Myrmidons followed, their black shields closing like waves around him. The battle turned. The Greeks surged forward. The Trojans fell by the hundreds, their cries drowned in the roar of vengeance. The flames upon the ships were doused, the beaches reclaimed. The name of Achilles, though its owner still sat far from the field, rose once more above the din. But victory, born of deception, carries its own curse. Patroclus, drunk with triumph, forgot the command he had sworn to obey. The sight of the Trojans breaking filled him with the fever of battle. He drove them past the river Scamander, past the plain, to the very gates of Troy. The walls towered above him, ancient and unyielding, as if the city itself were alive and watching. From those battlements Apollo looked down, radiant and pitiless. "Foolish mortal," the god murmured, "you wear the armour of one favoured by immortals, but you are not him." Oh, below, Hector, Prince of Troy, gathered his courage. The sight of the false Achilles had shaken him, but now, seeing the gods on his side, he steadied his heart. He called his men back, rallying them with a voice that thundered through the walls. "Do not fear him," he cried. "It is not Achilles, it is his shadow." And so the tide turned again. Apollo descended into the chaos, unseen, his presence a burning wind. As Patroclus charged toward the gates, the god struck him across the shoulders with an invisible hand. The blow was not flesh but power. It tore the helmet from his head, sent the spear flying from his grasp. The armor clattered against the dust, and for the first time the truth was laid bare. The man beneath was not Achilles, but Patroclus. Dazed, gasping, he stumbled backward. The Trojans closed around him, their spears flashing like teeth. Hector advanced, his eyes fixed with sorrow and resolve. "Who are you?" he asked, though no answer came. "To wear another man's glory." He thrust his spear. The bronze tip struck deep into Patroclus's chest. Time seemed to hold its breath. The world, for one heartbeat, went silent. Then the Myrmidons screamed. Patroclus fell. His blood darkened the earth. The armor of Achilles lay shattered beside him, glinting in the dust. The light of his eyes dimmed, but his lips still moved. In that final whisper, carried away by the wind, came a name, the only one that mattered: Achilles. Far from the field, in his tent by the sea, Achilles felt it. It was not a sound but a pull, a sudden stillness in his heart that told him something precious had been broken. The lyre slipped from his hands. The air itself grew colder. He rose without speaking, his breath shallow, his eyes distant as if he could already see across the miles of sand and smoke to where Patroclus lay. Word came soon after. A Myrmidon, bloodied and trembling, fell to his knees before him. "He is gone, Lord. Patroclus is fallen." Achilles did not move. The world around him seemed to dissolve, the sea fading to silence, the earth beneath his feet hollow. Then, slowly, he turned his gaze toward the horizon where Troy burned against the sky. His hands, once still, began to shake. The silence shattered. A sound escaped him low, terrible, unending. It was not the cry of a man, but the roar of something deeper, primal, God-born. The sea itself recoiled, waves rising in mourning. The Myrmidons fell to their knees, covering their ears. Even the gods paused upon Olympus, their laughter dying in their throats. Thetis rose from the water, her heart breaking at the sight of her son's anguish. "What has the world done to you, my child?" she whispered. But Achilles did not hear. His grief had already turned to something else, something vast and unstoppable. He tore his hair, cast himself upon the ground, his tears mixing with the dust. "He was more than a brother," he said to no one and everyone. "He was my soul." When the storm of his sorrow had spent itself, what remained was quiet, too quiet. He rose, his face pale as ash. "Bring me armor," he said. "New armor, fit for vengeance. I will go to war, not for honor, not for kings, not for glory, but for him." Thetis heard his call and vanished into the depths. She would go to Hephaestus, the divine smith, and beg him to forge armor that no mortal could break. But even as she went, she wept, for she knew what that armor would cost. On the plain of Troy, Hector stripped the fallen Patroclus of the armor of Achilles. He did not do it in hatred, but as a symbol, believing the battle had turned in Troy's favor. Yet as he lifted it, the sun dimmed, and the wind turned cold. The gods whispered to one another. The storm was coming. In the Greek camp, Achilles knelt beside the body of Patroclus. He placed a hand upon his friend's chest and closed his eyes. The silence between them was infinite, the calm before the end of the world. For now, the hero of Greece had no song left to sing, only the sound of his heart breaking beneath the weight of love and loss. The wrath that had once been withdrawn would rise again, more terrible than before. The return of the lion. The dawn that followed was unlike any other. The horizon bled crimson as though the very heavens mourned, and the sea, dark and heavy, moved with a sorrowful rhythm. The Greek camp lay in silence. The warriors who once looked to Achilles with envy now watched his tent with fear, for they knew that grief, when it takes root in a heart such as his, becomes not sorrow but a weapon. Patroclus lay upon a bier draped in white linen. His face, calm in death, seemed to hold a faint light, as though the soul within had only stepped away for a moment. Beside him knelt Achilles, unmoving, eyes fixed upon that still form. He had neither eaten nor slept. The fire that had once made him radiant was now smouldering beneath ash, silent but alive. At last he rose. "Bring water," he commanded, his voice hoarse but steady. The Myrmidons obeyed, their eyes downcast. They brought basins of sea-water, oils, and cloths. Achilles washed the body of Patroclus with his own hands, the same hands that had held him in laughter, that had fought beside him through years of war. He combed the dust from his hair, closed his eyes, and spoke softly. "Sleep, my heart," he murmured. "I will not rest until I have sent your killer to the shades." He covered the body, then turned toward the sea. The waves shimmered, and from their depths rose Thetis, radiant yet sorrowful. Her eyes, filled with the knowledge of eternity, fell upon her son, and she knew there was no turning him back. "Mother," Achilles said, his voice low, "you knew this would come." Thetis's gaze trembled. "I knew. But even knowing cannot ease the pain. You seek vengeance, but vengeance will take all that you are." "Then let it take me," he replied. "If I cannot have peace, let me have fire." She reached out, brushing her fingers against his cheek. "If you go to Hector, you will not return." "I know," said Achilles. "But I would rather die avenging him than live in the shadow of my own grief." Thetis bowed her head, her tears falling into the tide. "Then I will give you what you ask." She vanished into the sea, descending to the halls of Hephaestus, the god of fire and forge. There she knelt before him, her voice breaking as she spoke of her son's fate. Hephaestus, moved by her plea, agreed to fashion armour unlike any the world had seen. For 3 days and nights he worked within the mountain's heart. Sparks danced like stars. Molten bronze flowed like sunlight through the dark. When at last the armour was finished, it shone with a beauty that defied mortal understanding. Upon the shield he carved the whole of existence, cities and wars, feasts and harvests, stars turning above the earth. It was the universe itself, bound in bronze, a mirror to the soul of its bearer. When Thetis returned, she laid the armour before her son. The Myrmidons gasped. Even Achilles bowed his head before its light. "No man will stand against you now," she said. "But remember, this armour will guard your body, not your fate." Achilles took it in silence. As he lifted the great shield, the morning sun seemed to tremble upon its surface. The men watched him, awestruck, as though a god had risen among them. That night, he called his warriors together. The Myrmidons gathered in the flickering firelight, their faces hard and weary. Achilles stood before them, bareheaded, his golden hair falling across his shoulders. "My brothers," he said, "our dearest is gone. Patroclus fought in my armour and died in my name. His blood lies on Hector's hands and on mine, for I was not there. Tomorrow we fight not for Agamemnon, not for Greece, but for him. No mercy, no retreat." A murmur ran through the men, a sound of grief turned to purpose. The sea wind caught their banners and made them whisper like ghosts. Achilles looked out across them and saw, not soldiers, but extensions of his own rage. "At dawn," he said, "we rise." Before the sun climbed above the horizon, Achilles knelt beside Patroclus once more. He took a lock of his own hair, once promised to the river Spercheios, and placed it upon his friend's chest. "It belongs to you now," he said. "All that was mine is yours." When he rose, he donned the armour. The sound of it was like thunder rolling through the earth. The helmet closed over his face, the plume streaming behind him like flame. His spear glowed in the dawn light, His shield gleamed like a new sun. The Myrmidons shouted his name, their voices shaking the shore. The Trojans, who had woken to the scent of victory, saw him coming across the plain and felt their hearts turn to water. His stride was not mortal, his form blazed with the light of the divine. Even the horses of Hector trembled at the sight, and the god Apollo turned his face away. Achilles descended upon the battlefield like a tempest. The first ranks of Trojans broke before his charge. His spear moved faster than sight, his shield crushed men like stone. No arrow could touch him, no blade could slow him. He slew Aeneas's comrades. He scattered the sons of Priam like leaves in a gale. His voice carried over the chaos, terrible, unrelenting, beautiful in its ferocity. When the river Scamander rose up against him, swollen with the corpses of the slain, Achilles fought even the river itself. "You are not enough to drown me," he cried, and he drove his spear into its current. The water surged and hissed, but even the river, touched by divine will, could not quench his fire. The gods themselves intervened, Poseidon and Athena aided him, while Apollo guided the Trojans' retreat. The plains ran red, the dust turned to mud, and still Achilles advanced. At last, the Trojans fled behind their walls, all save one. Hector stood alone before the gates, his armour gleaming, his heart heavy. From the ramparts, Priam and Hecuba cried out for him to return, but Hector knew there could be no retreat. He had killed Patroclus, and now Achilles came for him. When the two faced each other, the world seemed to hold its breath. Achilles' armour burned like the sun, Hector's eyes were steady as iron. The plain between them shimmered with heat and silence. But that moment, the destined duel, was not yet. The day would end in blood, but not yet. Achilles paused, letting the Trojans see him, letting his fury fill their hearts with dread. "Tell Hector," he said to the wind, "that I am coming. Tell him to make peace with his gods." Then he turned back to the camp. Patroclus still lay waiting for the pyre, his spirit restless. Achilles would not let him cross into the afterlife alone. "Soon," he whispered, "I will join you, but first he must fall." As night fell, the Greeks feasted not in joy but in grim preparation. The Myrmidons sharpened their spears, mended their armour, and sang no songs. Achilles sat apart, the firelight glinting upon his new shield, his face a mask of silence. In his eyes burned both love and death, braided together like flame and smoke. Outside the camp, the wind shifted from the sea. It carried the scent of salt and destiny, the breath of gods, the sigh of fate. And somewhere beyond the walls of Troy, Hector felt it too. The coming of the lion, the duel with Hector. The dawn broke hard and colourless over the plain of Troy. The air was heavy with dust and silence, the kind of stillness that comes before storms or endings. The city's walls, tall and gleaming with dew, seemed to shimmer like a mirage of safety. Beyond them, the Greeks assembled in grim formation, and at their head, where the light struck brightest, stood Achilles. He had not slept. Through the long night, he had kept vigil beside the pyre of Patroclus. The fire had not yet been lit. He would not burn his friend's body until vengeance had been taken. He had promised it, and promises made by Achilles were no small things, they were binding as the words of gods. The armour Hephaestus had forged glowed faintly in the dim light. The designs upon the bronze cities, constellations, fields of war and peace seemed to shift and move as if alive. When he lifted the shield, the world reflected upon it like a mirror. His spear, the weapon of Peleus, shone like lightning drawn into mortal form. Every man who looked upon him that morning knew he would not return unchanged. The Myrmidons waited in silence. Achilles spoke to them only once. "Today we strike not for gold, not for glory, but for the dead. When Hector falls, his blood will be our offering." They bowed their heads, their hearts heavy and fierce. The gates of Troy opened. The Trojan army poured forth like a wave, their chariots thundering across the plain. Hector led them, his armor gleaming with the borrowed brilliance of Achilles' old gear, the very bronze stripped from the body of Patroclus. When Achilles saw it, the world narrowed to a single point. The cry that tore from his throat was beyond mortal sound. It was the roar of something ancient, a voice that made men stagger and gods turn their heads. The Trojans faltered, terror flooding through their ranks. Many turned and fled toward the city, their courage broken by that one sound. Hector stood alone for a moment, gripping his spear tighter, his breath quickening. The two armies collided like the meeting of storms. The air filled with bronze and screams. Achilles cut through the chaos as though the world itself parted before him. His spear struck, his shield slammed, his chariot wheels crushed the fallen. The Myrmidons followed close behind, their discipline as perfect as ever. The Trojans fell in droves, and the river Scamander ran thick and dark once more. No man could stand before him. Aeneas, son of Aphrodite, dared to challenge him, but the gods themselves whisked the Trojan hero away before Achilles' spear could strike. Lycaon, another son of Priam, fell to his knees, clutching the hem of Achilles' armor, begging for mercy. "I have knelt before you once," he cried, "and you spared me. Spare me again." Achilles' eyes, once capable of pity, were cold as steel. "You cannot bargain with death twice." His blade fell, and the boy's lifeblood spilled into the dust. The gods watched, silent. Even Apollo, protector of Troy, turned his face for a moment, for there was something unnatural in this fury, something that blurred the line between divine justice and human rage. By noon, the plain was littered with the dead. Achilles drove the Trojans back to the very walls of their city. He shouted for Hector by name, his voice echoing against the towers. "Come forth, breaker of oaths. Come see what you have done." Inside the gates, Hector heard him. He had fought all morning, his arms heavy, his breath ragged. Yet it was not fatigue that gripped him now, it was destiny. He turned to his father Priam and mother Hecuba, who stood upon the ramparts, pleading. "Do not face him, my son," Hecuba cried. "Come within the walls." The gods themselves could not stand before that wrath. Hector looked up at them, his face calm, his eyes dark with knowing. "I was not born to hide behind stone," he said. "If I flee now, the shame will follow me forever. Better to die by the hand of Achilles than live as a coward in my own city." He kissed his parents' hands and turned away. His wife, Andromache, watched from a distance, her child in her arms. She knew, without words, that she would not see him again. Hector walked through the gate, the sun at his back. The dust rose around his feet. Achilles waited before him, still and terrible, the light of his armor dazzling. The plain was empty now. Every soldier, Greek and Trojan alike, had fallen silent. Only the wind moved, carrying the low murmur of the sea. For a moment, neither man spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then Hector raised his spear. "I know you, Achilles," he said. "I know what drives you. It is not love of Greece, nor hatred of Troy, but your own heart, your pride, your grief. I killed your friend, but not from malice. I thought him you." Achilles' eyes did not soften. "You thought wrong." They circled each other, the dust swirling at their feet. The light struck bronze, blinding. Hector lunged. Achilles moved like lightning. Their spears clashed, bronze ringing against bronze. Hector's blow glanced off Achilles' shield. Achilles' strike tore through Hector's shoulder, but the Trojan did not fall. They fought as if the world itself depended on their struggle, as perhaps it did. Sweat streaked their faces, blood slicked their arms. Hector staggered, then regained his footing, his breath ragged but unbroken. "Promise me," he gasped, "that when I fall, you will return my body to my family." Achilles' voice was low and terrible. "There will be no promises between lions and men." He hurled his spear. It struck Hector's chest, driving through the gap beneath his collarbone. The Trojan prince stumbled, choking, his eyes wide with disbelief. The world seemed to go silent around him, the walls of Troy, the cries of his people, even the wind all faded into nothing. He fell to his knees, then to the dust. Achilles stood over him, chest heaving, eyes burning. "You took from me what I loved most," he said. "Now I take from you your honor." He stripped the armor from Hector's body, leaving it gleaming in the sunlight. Then, in an act that would stain his legend forever, he pierced the prince's ankles, bound them with leather thongs, and tied them to his chariot. When he mounted, he did not look back. The Myrmidons fell into formation behind him as he dragged the body across the plain, around the walls of Troy. The sound was unbearable, the scrape of bronze, the cries from the ramparts, the grief of a city breaking. Priam tore his robes. Hecuba screamed until her voice failed. Andromache, holding her child, fell to her knees as the dust of her husband's body rose into the air. But Achilles did not stop. He rode 3 times around the city, the dust of vengeance trailing behind him like smoke. The gods looked down, some in horror, some in awe. Even Athena, who had guided his hand, turned away in silence. At last, he returned to the Greek camp, his fury spent, but his soul hollow. He ordered the body of Hector to be thrown before the bier of Patroclus. "Now you have company," he said quietly. "Now, perhaps, you will rest." But even as he spoke, the emptiness within him deepened. Vengeance, he realized, was only a reflection of loss it could wound, but never heal. The sun sank behind the hills, turning the plain red as blood. The wind carried the cries of Troy across the sea. Achilles stood alone between the living and the dead, between glory and ruin, between the love he had lost and the peace he would never know. And though the gods had granted him victory, he felt only the slow, heavy ache of being human. The funeral games, the nights that followed, were quiet and strange. The air hung heavy with the scent of smoke and salt, and even the sea seemed subdued, as if the gods themselves mourned what had been done. Within the Greek camp, the torches burned low, their light casting long, wavering shadows across the sand. Troy's cries had faded, but in their place was something deeper, an echo of exhaustion, of grief, too vast for words. In the heart of the camp stood 2 bodies, Patroclus, beloved of Achilles, and Hector, prince of Troy. One wrapped in fine linen, honoured as a friend, the other left bare, dishonoured as an enemy. Between them sat Achilles, sleepless, the firelight dancing across his hollow eyes. The rage that had burned so fiercely within him had quieted now, leaving only emptiness behind. Vengeance had brought no peace. The silence pressed in on him, like the sea pressing against the shore. He rose before dawn, the horizon still dark, and walked to where the Myrmidons stood watch. "Build his pyre," he said, his voice low but steady. "Patroclus must be given to the flames." At his command, the men began to gather wood from the forests near the camp, pine, cypress, and cedar, cutting down the trees with solemn care. The sound of axes echoed across the plain, mingled with the distant cries of waking gulls. By midday, they had raised a great pyre, towering toward the sky, wide enough to bear a hero. Achilles placed upon it the treasures of Patroclus's life, his armour, his weapons, the cloak he had worn on quiet nights, the bowl from which he had drunk. He ordered 12 Trojan captives brought forth, taken in battle. One by one, they were sacrificed upon the pyre, their blood hissing as it met the wood. The Greeks stood silent. None dared speak. Achilles' eyes were cold as iron. He knelt beside the bier and whispered to the still form, "Forgive me, beloved. I have done what you asked. Hector lies in the dust, his body bound to my chariot. His blood is yours." The fire was lit. The flames roared to life, climbing high, their light painting the sky with shades of gold and scarlet. The heat washed over the watching soldiers like a wave. Sparks drifted upward, swirling into the night, until they became indistinguishable from the stars. The smell of burning cedar filled the air, sweet, heavy, and eternal. Achilles stood before it, motionless, until the fire had consumed everything. Then, when the pyre had burned low, he commanded his men to quench the embers with wine and gather the bones. They placed them carefully into a golden urn, wrapping them in soft linen. Achilles held the urn in his hands for a long moment, before setting it beside his own place of rest. "We will not be parted," he murmured. "Not in life, not in death." When the last rites were done, he called for the games to begin the funeral games, to honour the spirit of his fallen companion. For even in death, a hero's name must be celebrated with contest and courage. The Greeks gathered on the plain, their weariness forgotten for a day, their hearts lifted by the promise of remembrance. Achilles, who had long been silent, took command once more. His voice carried over the camp, clear and steady. "Let us honour him as he lived in strength, in skill, in the courage of men." First came the chariot race, the greatest of contests. The ground was marked, the prizes set, tripods of bronze, mares, fine armour, and gold. The finest drivers of the Achaean host took their places: Eumelus, Diomedes, Menelaus, Antilochus, and Meriones. The horses stamped and snorted, their breath misting in the cool air. Achilles raised his arm, and the trumpets blared. The chariots leapt forward like arrows loosed from the bow. The wheels screamed over the dust, the reins snapping taut. Diomedes took the lead early, his horses flying as if guided by the gods. Antilochus, younger and more daring, cut close behind, nearly overturning his rivals. The crowd roared as the racers thundered past, their faces streaked with sweat and sand. When at last the finish was reached, Diomedes crossed first, his skill unmatched. Achilles placed the laurel wreath upon his brow himself. "You drive as though Athena holds your reins," he said, and Diomedes bowed. Next came the foot race. Odysseus stood among the competitors, smiling faintly as though he had already won. Ajax the lesser, swiftest of men, stood beside him, his pride sharp as his stride. When the signal came, they sprinted across the plain, feet pounding the earth. Ajax leapt ahead, his speed like the wind. But as the finish drew near, Athena struck subtly. Odysseus stumbled, recovered, and at the last moment brushed past Ajax by the width of a hand. The Greeks erupted in laughter and cheers. Ajax scowled, but Achilles' smile returned for the first time in many days. "Even in grief," he said, "the gods love their games." Then came the boxing, the wrestling, the throwing of spears and the shooting of arrows. Great warriors tested themselves in friendly battle, the clang of their contests echoing into the afternoon. The dust rose, the sun burned high, and for a brief span of hours, the Greeks remembered what it meant to live. At the end of the day, as the light softened, Achilles called for one final event, a mock duel with spears blunted, in honour of the bond between comrades. The warriors paired off, their laughter weary but genuine. The sound of wood striking wood filled the air, a rhythm of life beating against death. Achilles watched them, his expression unreadable, his hands clasped before him. When the games ended, he rose and spoke to the gathered men. "You have done well," he said. "Patroclus would have smiled to see your strength, your courage, your spirit. Let his name live with ours, as long as men draw breath." The soldiers cheered softly, their voices rising like a prayer. And for a moment, even the gods seemed to listen. That night, the camp was quiet once more. The stars shone sharp above the sea, and the wind moved gently through the tents. Achilles sat alone beside the urn of his friend, the glow of the dying embers painting his face. In the distance, the faint cries of Troy drifted on the air, reminders of the war that still waited. He closed his eyes and spoke into the night. "The fire has taken you, but it has not taken me. I will meet you soon, Patroclus. Wait for me at the gates of Hades. When I come, we will walk together again." The waves whispered against the shore, their rhythm ancient and eternal. Somewhere beyond them, The gods turned their gaze once more toward the hero, who had defied both man and fate. The games had ended, the songs of joy had faded. Only the quiet promise of death remained, moving closer with every breath. The touch of the gods, the ashes of Patroclus still smouldered when the dawn rose grey over the plain. Smoke drifted toward the sea in thin ribbons, dissolving into mist. The Myrmidons had returned to their tents, weary but silent, their faces drawn. They had seen their commander weep, seen him kill, seen him become something more than man and less than mercy. The songs around the campfires spoke his name only in whispers, for Achilles had become the embodiment of divine fury, untouchable, unknowable, a thing shaped by grief and gods. He sat alone that morning, near the water's edge. The sea stretched endless before him, pale under the one light. His armour lay beside him, still shining though spattered with blood. The shield of Hephaestus caught the rising sun, scattering its light across the sand in 1,000 shifting colours. He turned it over slowly, tracing its carvings with a soldier's hand, the cities of men, the constellations of the heavens, the endless dance of creation and destruction. It was the world itself, captured and eternal, and he wondered what place he had in it now. Behind him, the camp stirred. The Greeks had reclaimed their strength, their confidence renewed by Hector's death. Yet beneath that renewal was unease, for though Achilles had brought them victory, he had also brought fear. They whispered that he had grown too close to the gods, that his soul no longer belonged entirely to men. Some said they saw fire in his eyes at night, others that his shadow no longer matched his form. They were not wrong, for as Achilles lingered between life and legend, the gods themselves began to close in around him. They had watched his grief, his wrath, his triumph, and they understood what mortals could not, that such power cannot dwell among men for long without breaking the world around it. Athena came first. She descended upon the camp in the form of a white dove, alighting upon his tent. When she took her true shape, her armour gleamed like polished moonlight, her eyes calm and endless. Achilles looked up and did not bow. "Daughter of Zeus," he said, "have you come to praise me or to chide me?" "Neither," she replied. "You have done what no mortal should. You have walked with gods, wielded wrath beyond measure, and bent fate to your will. But the balance must be restored. The scales are not yours to hold." "I seek no balance," Achilles answered. "I seek only to keep my promise. Patroclus waits for me." Athena studied him, her expression unreadable. "And so you will go to him, but before you descend, you must understand the measure of your choice. You have slain the noblest of men, and the gods will not forget. Apollo mourns Hector, and his anger is not a gentle thing." "I have faced his light before," Achilles said coldly. "Let him come." Athena's gaze softened with something almost like sorrow. Bravery is not the same as wisdom. She turned her eyes toward the sea, where the wind rippled across the water. "Your mother weeps beneath those waves. She knows what is to come." Then she was gone, dissolving into air, leaving behind only the faint scent of olive and iron. Achilles stood alone once more, but her words lingered like the taste of salt upon his tongue. He walked the shoreline until dusk. The sea murmured softly, and the horizon bled gold into violet. He could almost hear Thetis's voice beneath the waves, low, tender, pleading. Once she had cradled him as a child, dipped him into the Styx to make him strong. Now she mourned the very strength that had set him apart. When night came, he dreamed. In that dream, he saw the gods gathered upon Olympus, their forms bright as flame. Zeus upon his throne, Hera beside him, Athena with her spear, and Apollo radiant in wrath. They spoke of him as though he were both mortal and storm. "He has gone too far," said Apollo. "He drags the sons of Troy like beasts, defiling what the gods once blessed." "He suffers," said Athena. "He has lost what bound him to mercy." Zeus lifted his hand, silencing them both. "Let him have his time. His song nears its end. The world will remember him longer than it remembers us. When Achilles awoke, the dream clung to him like a shadow. The fire in his heart had dimmed to embers. For the first time, he felt something like weariness, not of the body, but of the soul. He had avenged Patroclus, yet peace eluded him. The songs the bards sang in camp rang hollow in his ears. Glory meant nothing if it could not bring back what was lost, and still the body of Hector lay before his tent. Day after day, Achilles dragged it behind his chariot, circling the walls of Troy, defying the gods, defying decency. Yet no decay touched it. Apollo, moved by pity, shielded it with his light, keeping the flesh whole and unbroken. Each morning the Trojans wept upon their ramparts, and each morning Achilles rose to repeat the ritual. His rage had become habit, and habit had become emptiness. One night, as he slept beside the dying embers of his fire, the tent filled with a light unlike any other. The air grew still, the world holding its breath. A figure stood before him, tall, pale, radiant with the faint shimmer of the afterlife. Patroclus, he spoke in the voice Achilles had known since youth, soft and steady. "You have done enough, my friend. Let me go." Achilles rose to his knees, his heart breaking anew. "I cannot," he said. "Your spirit lingers because of me. Stay until I can follow." Patroclus shook his head. "You are not bound by my death, but by your own pride. Release me. Let me cross the river. I will wait for you there." "Where?" Achilles whispered. "In the fields beyond the shadows," Patroclus said, "where the sun never dies, and no one speaks of war." Achilles reached for him, but his hand passed through the air like smoke. The ghost smiled once, the sadness in his eyes brighter than any light. "We will meet again," and then he was gone. When Achilles awoke, his cheeks were wet with tears. The first rays of dawn spilled across the sea, gilding the ashes of the camp. He went to Hector's body and looked down upon it. The fury drained from him. "I have done enough," he said quietly. "Let the gods have their justice. Let men have their mourning." He called for his servants and ordered the body washed, anointed with oil, and wrapped in linen. The Trojans who watched from the walls could scarcely believe what they saw. That night, as the stars gathered above, an old man walked out from the gates of Troy unarmed, robed in white. It was Priam, king of Troy, come to beg for his son's body. But that mercy, that meeting between king and killer, still waited just beyond the horizon of fate. For now, Achilles stood upon the edge of two worlds, half man, half memory, his heart caught between the wrath of gods and the forgiveness of men. And the gods themselves watched closely, for the flame they had kindled in him was beginning to wane, but it would not go out quietly. The death foretold. The night was clear and cruelly still. The stars hung sharp above the sea like 1,000 eyes, and the campfires of the Greeks flickered in the distance, their glow soft against the vast darkness of the plain. Achilles sat apart from the others, the waves lapping quietly against the sand near his feet. He could hear them whisper, 1,000 muted voices, some from the sea, others from his own heart. He was weary now, though not from battle. The weight of prophecy pressed upon him more heavily than any armour ever could. For days he had felt it approaching, that slow, invisible tightening of the world, the pull of destiny drawing him toward its final chord. He had lived long enough among men to know the signs of fate when they appeared. The gods had touched his life from birth, and every gift they had given carried its shadow. The power in his limbs, the fire in his blood, the glory that clung to his name, all were part of a bargain that had only one end. He rose, the sand shifting softly beneath his feet. The air smelled of salt and smoke, of iron and burned offerings. His mother's voice drifted through his thoughts, as gentle and relentless as the tide. You may choose long life and obscurity, or brief glory that will never fade. He had chosen long ago, but now, standing upon the edge of that choice, He felt the full ache of it. The camp behind him was quiet. The war had slowed into uneasy truce. The Trojans mourned their dead, the Greeks their fallen friends. Even Agamemnon, once swollen with pride, had grown sombre. He avoided Achilles now, his authority dim beside the hero's radiance. The other kings bowed their heads when Achilles passed, not out of courtesy, but awe and fear, for there was something in his eyes that no longer belonged to men. In the days since Hector's death, Achilles had changed. The fires of vengeance that once consumed him had cooled to a steady glow, deep and haunting. He no longer boasted, no longer laughed, no longer sought the praise of others. He moved through the camp like a spirit, silent, remote, the embodiment of purpose unfulfilled. One night, as the wind rose from the sea, he felt the earth tremble faintly beneath his feet. The air thickened with a shimmer of light, and the water parted. From its depths emerged Thetis, his mother, her hair silver as moonlight, her eyes full of both love and dread. She did not speak at first. She simply looked at him, as if memorizing every line of his face. "You have done what no mortal could," she said at last. "You have avenged your friend, and you have touched the heart of gods. But the time has come to lay down the sword." Achilles bowed his head. "I cannot. Not yet." "Then you know what follows," she said softly. "I do." She stepped closer, the sea still clinging to her skin. "Paris will strike you. His arrow will find the one place I could not protect. The gods themselves will guide his hand." He met her gaze without flinching. "If that is my fate, then let it come. I have never feared death, only the emptiness that follows." Thetis's expression wavered between pride and agony. "I will not ask you to stay. But promise me this when the end comes. Let me take you home. Let your bones rest beside your father's, and Patroclus's ashes lie with yours." Achilles nodded. "You have my word." For a moment, she reached out and touched his cheek. "You were born from the sea," she said, her voice trembling, "and the sea will claim you again. But know this, my child, you have lived as even the gods envy. No man will ever speak your name without awe." Then she was gone, dissolving back into the waves, leaving only the faint glimmer of foam where her feet had been. Achilles stood in silence. The prophecy hung around him like mist, cold and inevitable. Yet he felt no fear, only a strange calm. He had long ago made peace with the cost of glory. What remained was to face it with dignity. The next day, the sun rose over the plain like a coin of fire. The Greeks moved among the wreckage of war, repairing walls, gathering wood, mending sails. The Myrmidons followed their commander's every motion, their faces marked by reverence and dread. They, too, sensed the end drawing near. In the Trojan city, hope began to stir again. The death of Hector had been a wound from which Troy thought it would never recover, but time dulls even the sharpest grief. The Trojans believed Achilles had spent his fury, and that the gods would soon turn their favour once more. They did not yet know that their fate was already sealed, for the gods, in their hidden councils, had decided that the war must end soon. The balance of the world demanded it. The Ilium of Priam could not stand forever, and Achilles' brightest flame of Greece could not live long enough to see it fall. On the morning of his death, the omens were clear. A hawk circled low above the camp, crying thrice before flying west. The sea, calm for weeks, began to churn without wind. Even the horses of Achilles wept, their manes trembling with divine sorrow. They had been gifted speech by Hera, and one of them, Xanthos, turned his head and spoke in a voice like distant thunder. "Great Achilles, your hour draws near. The god Apollo waits for you before the Scaean gate." The men around him recoiled, their eyes wide, but Achilles only smiled faintly. "Then let him wait," he said. "I will not keep death waiting long." He armed himself slowly, reverently, each motion deliberate. The shield gleamed as he lifted it, reflecting not just the world around him but the weight of everything he had been. The helmet slid over his golden hair, the plume catching the wind. His spear, forged by the hands of gods, balanced perfectly in his grasp. He looked toward the city where his fate awaited, and for the first time in years, he felt peace. Before he mounted his chariot, he turned to his men. "If I do not return, burn me beside Patroclus. Let our ashes mingle, as our hearts once did." They bowed their heads, unable to speak. Achilles drove his chariot toward the plain, the wheels cutting deep into the dust. The sky darkened above him, clouds gathering though no storm had been called. From the walls of Troy, Paris stood ready, bow in hand, his heart pounding. Apollo stood behind him, unseen, guiding his aim. The god's voice whispered in his ear, "Strike true, and your name will be forever bound to his." Paris loosed the arrow. It flew through the air like a falling star, swift and silent. It struck Achilles in the heel, the one place untouched by the river Styx, the mortal mark left by his mother's hand. For an instant he did not understand. Then the pain flared, sharp and bright. His legs gave way beneath him, the world slowed. The roar of battle faded. He saw the sky above, vast and blue, and felt the warmth of the sun on his face. He thought of Thea, of his father, of the sea, of Patroclus's laughter echoing through the hills of Pelion. The faces of men and gods blurred together, distant and dreamlike. The Myrmidons reached him as he fell. They caught him, held him, their cries breaking against the sky. The blood from his heel darkened the dust, and the scent of it filled the air, a mingling of salt and bronze. Achilles, last of the great heroes, lay dying upon the plain he had conquered. He spoke once more, his voice faint but clear. "Tell my mother I kept my promise." His eyes, bright even as the light faded from them, turned toward the west. "And tell Patroclus, I am coming home." Then the breath left him, and the world seemed to shudder. The wind rose, sweeping across the plain, and the sea answered with a mournful roar. The gods stood in silence upon Olympus, watching the mortal flame they had kindled go out. In Troy, the bells tolled, their echoes mingling with the grief of men and the sigh of the sea. The prophecy had been fulfilled. The greatest of the Greeks had fallen not in defeat, but in completion. His story, written in fire and sorrow, had reached its end. Yet even in death, his name would not fade. The world would carry it forward, across centuries and continents, whispered in every language, remembered in every age. Achilles, son of Thetis and Peleus, had passed from man to myth, and somewhere beyond the mortal shore, where the rivers of the underworld met the silver plains of Elysium, Patroclus waited with open arms. The fall of Achilles. The plains of Troy were still when the lion fell. The winds hushed as though the earth itself held its breath, and the sky dimmed with the fading of his light. When Achilles fell beneath the Scaean gate, the world-tilted heroes faltered, kings wept, and even the immortals paused to listen. His death was not the quiet passing of a man, but the extinguishing of a constellation. The arrow of Paris, guided by Apollo, had found its mark in the heel, untouched by the Styx. It was a small wound, but through that wound all the greatness of his life drained away. The Myrmidons, his loyal companions, rushed to his side. They knelt around him in a circle, their shields raised as though they could hold off death itself. But no bronze could shield against prophecy. No man could defy the will of gods. He did not scream. He did not curse. He only drew one long, steady breath and looked toward the horizon where the sun bled red over the sea. For a moment, the world around him softened, the din of battle blurred into silence. The cries of men melted into the hum of the wind. He saw the sea as it had been in his childhood, the silver waves of Thea, his mother's arms rising from the foam. He saw Chiron's mountain, green and peaceful. He saw Patroclus smiling as he had in life, eyes bright with kindness. Then his gaze lifted toward the city that had been both his destiny and his doom. "You have your vengeance," he murmured. Now I am done. He fell back, the dust rising around him like smoke. The Myrmidon's cries broke the stillness. They lifted his body from the blood-soaked earth and bore him toward the sea, their black armour gleaming with tears and sand. Behind them, the Greeks rallied in fury, striking the Trojans with renewed wrath. The body of Achilles must not fall into enemy hands. Every man who could stand fought to defend it. Spears shattered, swords dulled, shields splintered, and still they fought. Ajax the Great, towering and relentless, carved a path through the chaos. His voice rose like thunder, commanding the men. "Protect him!" he roared. "No Trojan hand shall touch him while I draw breath." He planted himself over Achilles' body, his shield broad as a wall. Around him, the Myrmidons formed a ring, their formation tight as iron. The tide of Trojans broke against them, wave after wave. Above the carnage, Apollo watched in silence, his golden bow dimmed. There was no triumph in his gaze, only inevitability. He had guided the arrow, yes, but even gods must serve the designs of fate. On Olympus, Thetis wept, her grief shaking the sea itself. The waves rose high and crashed upon the shores, as though the ocean mourned its child. By sunset, the Greeks had carried Achilles' body back to the camp. His armour, once radiant, divine, and untouchable, had been stripped by Hector long before. Now his flesh, cold and pale, lay bare beneath the veil of linen. The Myrmidons laid him beside the urn of Patroclus, just as he had wished. The air was thick with salt and sorrow. No man dared speak. Agamemnon came at dusk. For a long time he stood in silence before the bier. When at last he spoke, his voice was rough and low. "You hated me," he said, "and I wronged you. Yet Greece would have fallen without you. There will never be another like you." His words fell into the wind, like offerings cast into a bottomless sea. Odysseus approached next, his eyes heavy with thought. "You were both blessing and curse," he whispered. "The fire that won us victory and consumed us all the same. May the bards remember the fire, not the ashes." Even Menelaus, king of Sparta, bowed his head. "Helen's beauty began this war, but your name will end it." Through the long night, the Greeks gathered wood for the pyre. They worked in silence, their faces lit by torchlight, their hearts burdened by awe. The Myrmidons prepared the funeral rites as their lord had commanded. They washed his body with oils, combed his golden hair, and dressed him in robes woven with threads of gold. Upon his chest they placed a garland of laurel, symbol of eternal victory. At dawn, Thetis rose from the sea once more. She came surrounded by her sister Nereids, their voices soft as morning winds. The soldiers fell to their knees as the goddess passed, her grief radiant, terrible, and holy. She knelt beside her son, her hands trembling as she touched his brow. "You were mine," she whispered, "mine for so short a time." She called upon the winds of the world, and they answered Zephyrus from the west, Boreas from the north. Together they came, carrying fire upon their breath. The flames leapt high upon the pyre, bright enough to turn night into day. The Greeks shielded their eyes, for the sight was almost too great to bear. The smoke rose in vast spirals, carrying with it the scent of cedar and myrrh, of salt and sorrow. It drifted over the plain, across the river, over the walls of Troy. The Trojans, seeing it from their towers, fell silent. Even in their victory, they knew that something greater than vengeance had passed from the world. When the fire burned low, Thetis descended once more. She gathered the ashes of her son and mingled them with those of Patroclus. Two spirits, joined forever warrior and friend, love and loyalty, bound beyond death. The urn was of gold, carved with dolphins and laurel leaves, its surface gleaming with tears. The Greeks built a great mound beside the sea to hold it a tomb worthy of gods. Upon it they placed two stones, one for each of the fallen. The waves lapped at its base, as though in perpetual benediction. In the days that followed, the war itself seemed to lose its meaning. The Greeks fought still, but their songs had changed. They no longer sang of Helen's beauty or Agamemnon's command. They sang of Achilles the swift, the shining, the terrible. They sang of his courage and his wrath, his love and his loss. They sang until the sound of his name became one with the sea, and the wind carried it across the ages. In Troy, too, his legend took root. Mothers whispered his name to their sons, not in hatred, but in awe. He was the storm that broke us, they said, but he fought as only the gods can fight. Priam, mourning yet noble, spoke his name with reverence. He gave my son back to me. Whatever else he did, let him be remembered for that. The gods, from their thrones on Olympus, watched as mortals built his memory into eternity. Some envied him, others pitied him. Zeus, who had watched his birth, spoke softly to the winds. So passes the mightiest of men. Not even the immortals live as brightly. The sea returned to calm. The waves, eternal as time, washed gently over the shore that cradled his tomb. Each dawn, the sun struck the mound first, before touching the camp or the city. The Greeks would say it was the gods paying tribute, the Trojans that it was the world itself bowing to its fallen champion. And deep beneath the waters, in the quiet halls of the Nereids, Thetis kept vigil. She sang to her son's memory a lullaby for a warrior who had never known rest. Her voice mingled with the movement of the tides, so that every wave that touched the earth carried her song. So ended Achilles, the greatest of the Achaeans. His body was gone, but his name had taken root in the soil of the world. The ages would remember his story not for its ending, but for its flame, the boy who ran faster than the wind, who loved fiercely, who defied gods, who chose glory over peace, and found in death what life had denied him. And far beyond the mortal world, in the quiet fields of Elysium, he walked again with Patroclus. The war, the grief, the noise, all had fallen away. Only the laughter of two friends remained, echoing softly beneath an eternal sky. The morning of the Myrmidons. The sea was grey the morning after the flames had died. Mist drifted over the shore like the breath of the gods, soft and mournful. The sand, still dark from the pyre's heat, was strewn with fragments of ash and cinder, glittering faintly in the dawn. The scent of smoke hung in the air, sharp, bitter, eternal. All around the camp, silence reigned. The Myrmidons, those loyal sons of Thea, gathered by the mound that now held their lord. They came armoured but unarmed, their shields polished, their heads bowed. For 10 years they had followed Achilles through storm and slaughter, through glory and grief, and now that his fire was gone, they stood hollow and uncertain as men stripped of their shadow. Their black banners hung limp in the damp wind. The sea whispered at their feet, pulling away the sand grain by grain, as if the world itself sought to erase the traces of all that had been. None spoke. They did not weep. Soldiers who had seen a decade of war had long forgotten the habit of tears. Yet their grief was a living thing, a weight that bent their shoulders, that filled their throats with salt. At the centre stood Automedon, charioteer and companion of Achilles, the man who had steered the hero's immortal horses into battle. His face, once fierce, was drawn and grey. He stepped forward and knelt by the mound, his voice rough as he spoke. "Lord of the Myrmidons, breaker of men, son of the sea goddess, hear us now. We who followed you into every storm remain, but without your light the world is dim. You have gone to the land beyond the sun, yet your name burns here still." He placed upon the mound Achilles' spear, its tip dulled by battle, its shaft still marked with the grip of his hand. The men followed, each offering what they carried, a shield, a fragment of armour, a wreath of laurel. The mound became a mountain of remembrance, shimmering faintly beneath the morning light. From the sea, a voice rose soft, distant, and sorrowful. Thetis had come again, her song carried upon the tide. It was a melody older than mankind, older even than Olympus. The warriors froze as the sound swept through them, a lament woven from waves and wind. Some said the sea itself wept, others said it was the world remembering the passing of its greatest son. The goddess's voice rose and fell like the tide. Sleep now, my child, the swift of heart, the bright of flame. Sleep where no arrow flies, no spear divides the air. The sea remembers you, the stars remember you, and I forever remember you. The waves reached higher, touching the base of the mound before retreating again. The soldiers sank to one knee, their heads bowed. They had fought under many banners, but only one had been sacred. Achilles had been not only their commander, but their mirror, the embodiment of all they had hoped to be. When the song faded, the Myrmidons turned toward Automedon, awaiting his word. "We live because he led," he said quietly. "We will return home bearing his memory, but first we will keep our watch." And so they stood, hour after hour, through the slow passage of the sun. No man moved. The gulls wheeled silently overhead, their cries swallowed by the wind. Beyond the horizon, Troy still smouldered, its towers fractured, its glory fading into myth. The war that had consumed nations was nearly done, yet the victors found no triumph in it. As evening fell, Agamemnon came to the shore. His armour was muted by soot, his crown dented, his face lined by years. He approached the mound and stood beside Automedon. "He was the finest of us all," the High King said, "and we could not have peace while he lived. Such is the curse of greatness, it does not suffer equals. Thank you for watching." Odysseus joined him, his keen eyes dulled by thought. "He lived as he wished," the cunning king murmured. "That is all any man can ask. Yet even his glory is a wound upon us. None who saw him will ever again be content with the world." Agamemnon nodded, and for the first time in years there was no anger between them. Grief had made equals of them all. Night deepened. The stars shimmered upon the sea like scattered embers. The Greeks built no fires that evening. The light of the heavens was enough. The wind shifted, carrying faint sounds, the crash of waves, the creak of empty ships, the whisper of oars. It was as if the world moved cautiously around the place where Achilles lay, unwilling to disturb his rest. In the distance, the walls of Troy stood black against the sky. Priam's city was nearly dead, its people broken, its king mourning. Yet within those ruins, a strange, quiet reverence stirred. For even those who had lost everything knew that something divine had passed through their lives. In the Greek camp, Achilles' tent still stood, though its master no longer lived. Inside, his shield leaned against the wall, its carving still gleaming faintly. The air within smelled of cedar, salt, and ash. Briseis, the woman once given to him as spoils of war, entered the tent softly. Her steps made no sound on the sand. She knelt before the empty couch where Achilles had once slept. "You were a storm," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You destroyed, but you also protected. You loved fiercely, and that love burned the world." She placed upon the ground a small vessel of oil, a token of mourning, and bowed her head. "May the gods remember you kindly. I will remember you always." When she left, the tent was still. Only the sound of the sea filled the space, steady and endless. Far beneath the waves, Thetis wandered through the halls of coral and pearl, her heart heavy with loss. The Nereids tried to comfort her, but she would not be consoled. "He was mortal," they said, "and mortals must die." But Thetis answered, "He was mine, and so his death is also mine." Her sorrow darkened the waters for leagues around, and ships that sailed above them felt their timbers tremble with the weight of her lament. Above, dawn came again. The sun touched the mound first, gilding its curve in light. The Myrmidons, still on watch, raised their heads as the rays reached them. For a moment, It seemed as though the earth breathed again. Automedon stepped forward and spoke once more. "We will sail soon. Greece calls us home. But though we leave this shore, our hearts remain here. He will not be forgotten. As long as we live, we carry his name." The men struck their shields with the butts of their spears, a slow, resonant rhythm, like the beating of a heart. The sound rolled across the sea, echoed by the cliffs, until it seemed that even the gods might hear it. When it faded, the wind rose again, soft and salt-sweet. The sea shimmered, the waves folding gently over one another, as if in prayer. The mound of Achilles stood unmoving, a monument not of stone, but of spirit. And though the Myrmidons would one day return to their homes, though their ships would weather and their spears would rust, the name of Achilles would never fade from their tongues. They would tell their children and their children's children of the man who defied fate, who loved as fiercely as he fought, whose glory lit the world and whose fall broke it. In time, the wind would wear away the mound, the sea would reclaim the shore, and Troy itself would vanish into legend. But the sound of the waves, forever whispering upon the sand, would carry his name to every coast and every age. The immortal legacy. The sea lay calm now, its grey surface broken only by the slow drift of foam. The war was ending. Troy's walls, once radiant as marble flame, had fallen to ruin. The ships of Greece, scarred and weary, prepared for the long voyage home. Yet even as kings packed their treasures, and soldiers sang of returning to wives and hearths, one name hung in the air heavier than all others: Achilles. His mound stood by the water, vast and shining beneath the dawn, the winds brushing over it like reverent hands. It had become both altar and memory. The Greeks came to it one by one, leaving tokens: a blade, a lock of hair, a ring of gold, a carved shell from the sea. No one spoke above a whisper in that place, for though his body was ash, Achilles still seemed to live there, in the rush of the tide, in the hum of the air, in the echo of bronze striking shield. Odysseus lingered longest. He stood with his cloak drawn close, his eyes on the horizon where sea and sky met. Around him, the camp was silent. "He was everything we feared and envied," Odysseus murmured, "and because of him, none of us will ever be the same." He knelt and pressed his hand to the sand. "You chose a short life, friend, but you will outlive us all." When the Greeks at last set sail, the wind filled their sails as if drawn by unseen hands. From their decks, they looked back one final time. The sun caught the top of the mound, turning it to gold. Some swore they saw a figure standing there, tall, bright, unyielding, watching them go. Troy smouldered behind them. Its towers had fallen, its people scattered or enslaved. Yet within its ruins, old King Priam's tomb faced that of Achilles across the plain. The two mounds, one for the Prince of Troy, one for the scourge of Greece, became like twin guardians of memory, staring eternally across the space that had once been drenched in their son's blood. The poets would one day call that plain sacred, for it held the echoes of men who had walked with gods. Years passed, and the sea claimed the battlefield. The grasses grew over the bones, the rivers changed their course, and the world moved on. But the name of Achilles did not fade. Wherever the Greeks sailed, they carried his story. In the markets of Mycenae, bards sang of his wrath and his sorrow. In the temples of Athens, children learned his deeds as prayers. In the far islands beyond the wine-dark sea, sailors swore they had seen his ghost rising from the foam, his armour shining like dawn. The poets came after the keepers of memory. They shaped his life into song, his death into legend. They called him swift-footed Achilles, the breaker of men, the lion of Greece. Yet within their verses they also whispered of his heart, the tenderness that lived within his fury, the love that tethered him to the earth. They sang of Patroclus, of friendship so deep it defied even death. They sang of Thetis' sorrow and the river that could not protect her child. They sang of how the greatest of heroes was also the most human of them all, and so, from the ashes of war, something beautiful endured. Achilles became not merely a man remembered, but an ideal, the symbol of passion that burns too brightly to last, of glory bought with mortality, of love that transcends every wound. In time, the people of the coast built temples along the shores of the Aegean. Within them, they carved statues of the hero taller than life, yet with eyes carved soft, thoughtful, almost sorrowful. Sailors prayed to him for safe passage, for speed, for courage in storms. Mothers told their sons his tale not to make them fierce, but to remind them that even the strong must love and weep. At Lus, the White Isle, the legend deepened. It was said Thetis carried her son's spirit there, to dwell forever beside the sea. Fishermen swore they saw his form walking along the beach at twilight, the glow of his armour reflected in the waves. His voice, they claimed, rode upon the wind, calling to them from beyond the mist. And sometimes, when the sea was calm and the stars hung low, those who listened closely could hear two voices, Achilles and Patroclus, speaking softly together, as if their friendship had become part of the ocean's song. The gods, too, remembered. Apollo's wrath cooled with centuries. Athena, who had once stayed Achilles' hand, honoured him with shrines. Even Zeus, the father of gods and men, looked upon the mortal who had burned so fiercely and felt a kind of awe. He lived, Zeus said to Hera, as we dream but dare not. Time turned, as it always does. Empires rose and fell. Languages changed. The Bronze Age rusted into legend. Yet the name of Achilles travelled on, like light that refuses to fade. Poets sang him into eternity. Scholars debated whether he was man or myth. Painters captured his fire on marble walls, and each age found in him what it needed most. The lesson that courage and love are never without cost. In distant lands, far from the ruins of Troy, travellers would look upon the sea and think of him. The waves crashing against the cliffs were said to echo his heartbeat. The gulls wheeling above the foam were said to carry his cry. The horizon itself seemed touched by his spirit, always reaching, never still. At night, when the moon hung full and silver, the mound of Achilles gleamed faintly against the darkness. Some said the gods kept a single star burning above it, a reminder that even mortal fire can outshine eternity. The Myrmidons had long since died, their names forgotten, their shields buried by the tide, but their oath endured in every echo of his story. And so his legend grew, told by those who never saw him, sung by those who never fought beside him. For every generation must remember the cost of greatness, the fragility beneath strength, the heartbeat beneath the roar. Achilles became not only the warrior of Phthia, but the measure of all who sought to defy their limits. In the end, he was not just the hero of a single war. He was the mirror in which mankind saw itself, the brilliance and the ruin, the pride and the tenderness, the beauty that can only live for a moment before it burns away. Far beneath the surface of time, his story still moves through waves, through words, through the endless rhythm of hearts that dream of more than life can hold. And on the quiet shore of eternity, where the fields of Elysium meet the edge of the sea, Achilles walks beside Patroclus. They speak of simpler things now, the scent of pine on Pelion's slopes, the laughter of the Myrmidons, the sound of waves against their father's harbour. Above them, the stars shine brighter than any torch of Troy. The war is long ended, the gods sleep, and still the name of Achilles drifts through the cosmos like a song that never dies.